workshops during the. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thanks for the opportunity.
We had another request for a deputation from Batchford, which I have denied under the payment policy. We don't have any questions from the gallery or any petitions tonight. So we now move on to item 9.5, which is the outstanding resolutions for May. Recommendation is to receive and note the outstanding resolutions. Someone like to move that way? Thank you, Hales. Seconding that, thank you. Do you want to speak to that? Does anybody want to speak to it or have any questions relating to the report? Councillor Robertson.
Yes, I have a few questions, Mayor, on this, on the outstanding resolutions. On page 11, where we have the ones for the turf trial. Forgotten the number, but it's about halfway down that page. It says that the actual trial has been underway for 2 years, and I believe that the results are plain to see, despite less than optimal management of those new varieties that were planted, Tiftuff and Zoysia. And they're important turf varieties for us to have because they have important characteristics that meet our environmental management objectives. They require less water, less mowing. They're harder wearing than kikuyu. So to me, this business that we need to keep on going, looking at these things, when I think that it's patently obvious that that either of those two grasses, which have been on site for a couple of years, have had some hard wear from Rotary Art Show, the Schoolies Festival, the year before last, etc. That these are two we need to be thinking seriously about when it comes to. So it's
so what's your question, Councillor Robertson?
Yeah, that there's a need for this trial to keep on going. Of course it will, because but to me, we need to be already assessing. So are we going to assess these two species instead of leaving it on the outstanding resolutions?
Thank you. Ask perhaps Kathy Hayter.
Thank you, through the Mayor. A couple of things there. One is I understand that during COVID there was reduced traffic in that area, so things like this obviously didn't go ahead. But the other thing is there was some discussion around the causeway development of that potentially being used for the fairground things. But certainly we can look at that, and I'll talk to the team and come back to you, Councillor Robertson, with a more definitive response.
Thank you. Another question, Mayor, on page 12, the multi-purpose boat launching facility, the business case. It's very good that it's moving ahead, getting this project closer to being shovel ready. Have we applied for any grants for this business case? Because I believe that there's a current or an existing round of better building. I think it's the building better regions from the federal government, I think.
Through the Mayor, no, we haven't, because it wouldn't be appropriate for council to apply for any funding with something that hasn't been endorsed yet. So until we have the business plan coming back to council, and it's something the council would be considering, and we have detailed designs and costings, we can't apply for funding.
Okay. On page 13, we have the Jagger Road speed limit issue. Has the report for that speed limit been received yet?
Thank you, through the Mayor. I believe that report just came through last week, Councillor Robertson, and there's a report coming to council in June.
Okay. And also page 13, the urgent pump repair for Encounter Lakes. Is there any information coming back? Has it been received yet as to whether there's a better option to buy a new one or to to do a significant overhaul of the existing one.
I'm happy to do that one. So through the Mayor, works will commence tomorrow on the renewal repairs. It was much more cost effective to do the repairs and actually replace, particularly in terms of warranties as well.
Excellent, because I was wondering in relation that maybe there might have been a good case for a replacement of a new one, but in the present budget situation,
It was
make better sense.
double for replacement, but the warranty was half the time as that of renewal cost, or renewal costs are about 30,000, and it was a 12-month warranty of those works.
Thank you, that's all.
Thank you. Does anybody else have any questions? Councillor Kemp?
Thanks, Mayor. Through the CEO, more of a clarification around, I'm not quite sure this issue is an outstanding resolution, but it's been going on for a long time. It's the Encounter Bikeway Master Plan. I believe it's in our budget for this year to be completed. And we've only got 4 weeks to go. And I'm not quite sure if the plan's been finished yet or when it will be presented to council. So I know it's not an outstanding resolution per se, but I couldn't find it anywhere. So that's why I thought I'd raise it under this agenda item, just to get some clarification around that, because the master plan refers back to the Minister Spears about lot 51 as to whether the council will be having that or not having that. So
Kathy Hayden may be able to answer that for you, Councillor Kemp.
Thank you, through the Mayor. So the Encounter Bikeway Master Plan from the river to the Alexandrina boundary. So that's what that feasibility workshop was a couple of weeks ago. And from there, you might recall there was a few comments and suggestions from elected members about different options. So we're now working on that to bring a report back to council to progress that master plan.
thank you.
Are there any further questions or discussion on the outstanding resolutions? Hales and Henderson, do you want to add anything? No. In that case, I'll put it to the floor. All those in favour? Those against? That's carried unanimously. Thank you. We now move to 9.2, membership appointment to the Recreation and Sports Grants Working Group. And I'll do that recommendation en bloc unless anybody objects to that. And can I have someone to move recommendation 1 and 2 en bloc? Thank you. And Councillor Littley, do either of you want to speak to that? Does anybody want to speak to that? Councillor Robertson?
Yes, Mayor, I know that in the formation of this group that there's two staff members there. I suppose Jeremy Bell is considered a staff member, but the business of this group is handing out small amounts of money for, and as it mentions here on page 16, this is essentially an administrative process. So I'm wondering, yeah, sure, no problem with the replacement of that another person, but given all the workload we have this year, I'm wondering if this particular working group really requires 2 staff to be on it. It's just one that receives and adjudicates on, you know, $1,000 here and $1,000 there, and I just question whether I have no problem with the appointment, but I just question whether we need to have 2 staff members, you know, fighting this.
Yeah. I mean, when we look at the terms of reference later on, if you want to change the terms of reference, that would probably occur. But at the moment, the terms of reference of the working group looks at membership being 2 elected members of the City of Victor Harbor and 2 staff members of the City of Victor Harbor. And so that's on page 18. So at the moment, we're working to those terms of reference unless they change. As you said, we've got Star Club officer who's Jeremy Bell, and this recommendation is looking to appoint the team leader of environment and recreation strategy to the working group. Is there any more discussion in relation to 2 recommendations? In that case, I'll put it to the floor. All those in favour? And those against? That's carried, thank you. 9.3, Environment Protection Authority Board nominations.
Mayor, I'd like to declare a material conflict of interest, and I'll deal with that by leaving the chamber.
Thank you very much, Councillor Henderson. The recommendation, there is 2 recommendations that council receive and note the authority board nominations report, and the second recommendation is that council supports Councillor Henderson. I will do those recommendations separately. The first one that council receive and note. Thank you, Councillor Littley. And do I have a seconder for that, Councillor? Is there anything to discuss in relation to the report? No? Does anybody want to discuss anything in relation to the report? All those in favour? Those against? That's carried unanimously. The second recommendation is that council supports Councillor Marion Henderson to nominate for the Environment Protection Authority Board. Charles, you moving that one? And Councillor Schofield seconding that. Either of you want to speak to that? Anybody want to speak to that? Councillor Robertson?
Yeah, Mayor, I just wish Councillor Henderson, she's not here, but I'll talk to her later. Wish her the best of luck. It's a major job, being a board member on that EPA, and yeah, she's already a pretty busy person down here. But it'll be a feather in her cap if she's able to successfully compete. I imagine there'd be a very strong field for those positions. So I wish her well.
Thank you. I'll put that to the vote. All those in favour?
Point
Sorry,
of
quite
order.
quickly.
I'd like to have a word, please.
You probably don't need to make it a point of order, but just say you missed me or something, but
Well,
that's
you're
fine.
About to call the vote.
Okay, sorry, Councillor Kemp.
Basically, Magic, this is not, it's a hard decision because I was considering applying for that as well. And the reason why I didn't apply for it was because as a council, we've got a huge workload over the next 18 months or thereabouts before the next elections. And I think, we're very busy. And I think our priority is our council and our community. There's nothing personal against Councillor Henderson. I think I wish her best of luck because I know she'll get the nod. But personally myself, I just feel that, councillors going outside looking at other boards and things like that is great for, professional development. It's great for expanding and networking and all those things. But then again, and when you look at the CV of Councillor Henderson, it's very impressive. But again, she has a huge workload she's taken on as a councillor. And I think taking something else on like this at this level is going to be a greater workload for her. And again, as I said, I was going to go for this myself, decided not to because I think I need to put my energies into the council, and it's what we have to require over until the next election. That's why, personally, nothing against Councillor Henderson. I wish her the best of luck, but I can't support this. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Kemp. Any further discussion? Councillor Charles or Schofield, do you want to close the debate? All those in favour? Those against? That's carried, thank you. Just let Councillor Henderson back in. Item 9.4, the review of the asset accounting policy. I'll do that recommendation en bloc unless anybody objects. And first recommendation is council receive and note the policy report. And the second recommendation is that council adopt the asset accounting policy as provided at attachment B. Thank you, Councillor Robertson. And does somebody want to second that? Thank you, Councillor Littley. Do either of you want to speak to that? Councillor Robertson?
Yes, thanks, Mayor. This is an interesting item. If I can just ask a question first up, about this asset accounting policy, has this come up as a result of any legislative requirement that we change the way we deal with assets, or is this something that's come up in terms of the experience of the finance and particularly, I guess, infrastructure department? How did it?
I'll ask
legs?
Kelly. Kelly can respond to that one.
Thank you, through the Mayor. So it is one of the policies that most councils will have, that sets up the capitalisation levels for assets. It hasn't come about because of any particular changes. It was due for review, overdue for review, and we've undertaken that review at this point, which is why the policy has come up to council. The main changes are essentially a lot of formatting and some adjustments to some definitions, as well as the inclusion of a few items such as intangible assets for software.
Yeah, so my comments on this are that I find it very interesting because, as you know, I keep on about this topic, but our enterprise resource program that's supposed to be starting up this year, supposed to be getting going in next year, but doesn't have much budget for it. This is precisely the type of processes we're introducing to the council's, in this case, asset accounting, that we absolutely will be needing to review when it comes to, the new enterprise resource program. So I've read through it carefully. I think I've got no further comments except that on it. It's just to say that this is the sort of thing that we really need to make sure that we have built into the new enterprise resource program. So, and it's also interesting because on page 28, here you can see it in the middle there, just above risk assessment, it says the policy is an outward facing document that will be available on council's website for the public to view. This is precisely also the sort of question we need to be asking when looking at this enterprise resource program, is to what extent do we want to have the public come and seek information online for the things that the council does, or to what extent do we expect them to come and ask for information to be given to them. If I can just turn to page 44, Kelly, the material levels for capital organisation at the top of the page there, it's under 6.1.1. And here we've got roads, drainage and other infrastructure. So the minimum value, or that will score a record, is $10,000. And I was wondering, that seems like a lot of work because we have an immense amount of assets tied up in roads, drainage and infrastructure. And if we're dealing with identifying assets that are down to $10,000 in value, then we would have an awful lot of assets. Surely with those assets, we'd be aggregating those up to something like $100,000 or $500,000 or something like that. I just don't understand why the material level, it's only $10,000.
Through the Mayor, so in terms of those particular material levels for the capitalisation, they haven't changed from the last policy. So the main change within that 6.1 is the addition of software as a separate line so that we can clearly show how we are going to capitalise any change to software in the future. In terms of roads, drainage and other infrastructure, the $10,000 is pretty much a benchmark with other councils. So we did have a look at other councils' policies. The impact of having a higher level of capitalisation means that a lot of projects would hit our operating account and thus our rates. So by having a capitalisation level sitting around this mark, we're able to spread the cost of that asset across a number of years and across the ratepayer base over a number of years rather than the current ratepayers paying for it all through rates in a particular year. So we're trying to be fairly conservative with those figures. And essentially what you're looking at is a small section of a road that can be completed and capitalised in the year.
Thank you, Kelly. Councillor Littley, did you want to speak? Does anybody else want to speak? Councillor Kemp?
Thank you, Mayor Jenkins. Just a question on the document and attachment B about the definitions. You did mention it, Kelly. Definitions are there to help the reader understand the document, yet we've halved the definitions by half. So I'm just wondering what changed dramatically that we need to reduce our definitions by. So does it make it harder to read the policy, or does it the definitions that you removed don't have no policy context to it?
Again, through the Mayor. So we actually took out a number of definitions that those exact words weren't actually anywhere in the policy. So they must have been in a previous version explaining a particular item, and we've taken those out because they aren't used anymore. So with accounting standards and updates, sometimes the terminology changes, and that hasn't always been picked up. So we reviewed the definitions and also had the audit committee review the definitions and had some changes from the audit committee members as well. So we're reasonably happy that we've got all the ones that actually need to be there, and we've just removed the ones that weren't required.
Thank you.
Any further questions or commentary? Councillor Robertson, did you want to wrap up the debate?
Yeah, thanks, Mayor. I think this is a good piece of work. It certainly helps with what's been done in terms of capitalising software. That's a great move, and yeah, I appreciate the work that's been put into it. It should allow for, you know, better asset accounting.
Thank you. I now put the recommendations en bloc to the floor. All those in favour? Those against? That's carried unanimously. Thank you very much. We now move to item 9.5, Planning Development Act 2000. Notified development adjacent landowner. I'll do this one by one. The first recommendation is that council receive and note the report. Moving that way. Thank you, Councillor Charles. Seconding, Councillor Henderson. Do either of you want to speak to that? No, does anybody want to speak to that? Councillor Kemp?
Thank you, Mayor Jenkins. I understand, I guess this goes through to Director Pat House. My question is along the lines that with what this report does and what it says, that stage 3 of the new planning system commenced on Friday the 19th of March, but in our special council meeting on the 19th of April, we moved to make comments on a adjoining land as an owner on a service station, which will go to CAP. When you look at these recommendations, now we're rescinding, we're not going to be doing that. So I can't understand why did on the special council meeting of 19th of April, we had that information in council, and why did we go against what the recommendation of the what was given to us, which is coming out tonight, that we're not making any comments on as adjoining landowner. So I don't understand why, if we had that information up front, why do this special council meeting we went ahead and made a comment which is against basically what we're going to be voting on tonight.
Through the Mayor, this isn't rescinding those previous decisions that were made about making representation to a particular application at a point in time. It was what's happened as a result of the new Act is that there's more of a propensity now for council to be called up as adjoining landowners because of the expanded notification footprint for development. Extends a bit further than it used to. So it does capture council into these matters a little bit more frequently. So at that point in time, though, we weren't prepared. We didn't have policy documentation ready. We still needed to work some of that up. So, and council had, through a number of its members, expressed a desire to speak into those particular matters. So they were dealt with as individual matters. There were 2 at the time. This is looking at dealing with any subsequent matters here on in. It doesn't make redundant any of the decisions council have already made.
Appreciate that. Thank you. Just a follow-up question. To me, again, if we've had that information prior, then I don't know why in the 19th of April we, went ahead and made paid a certain amount of money to get an independent report to make comment on. Now we're looking at tonight when the gallery gets to see what we're going to be voting on. It seems like a contradictory of terms in the sense that, we did something, a month after it came out, and then we go to reverse it again a month later in a context. So to me, that doesn't look like good policy to me in the way it reads.
If I may, through the Mayor, Councillor Kemp, you're not reversing any policy. So previously council hadn't given any delegation, because what this is actually looking to do is to give the delegation so that the CEO can actually either put in a submission on behalf of council if it so chooses, or decline to. So previously in the April special council meeting, council hadn't given any delegations. So if we were to, it has to come to the chamber. There wasn't a process in place. So what we're looking to do is put that process in place by way of delegation to any development application that comes in from now on, where we are an adjoining landowner as a council. Otherwise, every time there's an application, I would be required to come to the chamber. So you will see later on in the report, there's another one for the Adelaide Road. So, and that also states that if this is supported, then that would supersede that item because we wouldn't be submitting. But what we're also saying is there should be a policy for council to determine when it does and does not actually put in submissions to as a adjoining landowner, because there will be circumstances where you'll want to have some input and we'd need to workshop those and then bring them to the chamber. But some more very basic minor ones, you don't want them to come to the chamber every time. We didn't have a delegation before, hence I have to bring them back to council. So it hasn't changed what you previously did at all because there was nothing in place.
No, I thank you very much for the clarification, but I guess one way we can do it is rescind the previous motion on the 19th of April to fall in line with this, because it goes to cap in June and there's still time to reflect that. But anyway, just a comment.
Any further comments on that first recommendation, which is receiving and noting the report? In that case, I'll put it to the floor. All those in favour? Those against? That's carried, thank you. Second recommendation, that council resolves it will not make any recommendation in respect to development applications lodged within its council area where the council assessment panel is the relevant authority and where public notification is required pursuant to section 107 of the Planning, Development and Infrastructure Act 2016. Someone like to move that way? Thank you, Councillor Robertson, and seconding Councillor Henderson. Either of you like to speak to that? Councillor Robertson.
Yes, thank you, Mayor. Just question to the CEO. My understanding is you've just said that the if the council wants to make representations, it does so through the CEO. But this particular resolution, which was why I wanted to question it, was why are we doing this? That we are resolving that in the first line, we will not make any representations in respect of development applications in the council area where the cap is the relevant authority. And I'm thinking, why do we shut off options on this by putting this in here? I would have thought there would have been, particularly in the changeover from the old system to this new one, that there'll be more occasions when we need to think hard about what goes on and what is in fact the council assessment panel is, yes, part of the council's activities, but more and more and more we're completely divorced from it. Four of the five members are independents. We still have one elected member representative left, and even that position is under, people are busy trying to get rid of that one. So it's kind of at arm's length from what's going on in development. So is it true, CEO, that we're saying here we're not going to make any further representations, no matter what comes up?
Yes, so both in most circumstances, yes. Because you've got a Development Act and a code that actually does administer the policies of what council wants to have within its area. And that's what your development assessment panel would assess those developments upon. And it's seen as more as a conflict if council then gets involved in its own development code, whether it's for or against.
It seems to me that we walk into this with our hands tied behind our backs. I mean, we don't control the council. The assessment panel is part of our operations, but we have, it seems to me, at best, a very peripheral involvement with that institution. It operates under its own rules. It has independent members, and they may or may not be cognizant of what's important in the community. We'll see how they go, but to at this stage, to be saying that we are never, or we're not going to make any representations in the future seems to me to be boxing ourselves into a corner.
Thank you, Councillor Robertson. Councillor, at this moment, Councillor Henderson, did you want to speak as a second? No. Councillor Glasbrook?
Well, I support this recommendation. As Councillor Kemp has just mentioned about our last meeting when we did make a representation, I wasn't at all comfortable with that. I didn't think that we should be doing that because we do have an assessment panel that assesses applications against the rules that we don't know. And for a group of elected members basically to say they support something or don't support something because it may be a local business or it may be a large business or for whatever reason, I think is inappropriate. So I certainly support this 100%.
Thank you. Are there any further discussion? Councillor Littley?
Yeah, I'll support this motion as well, although I don't believe that at the time when we decided whether on April 19 that the actions of the chamber were inappropriate in any way, because that was allowed under the guide that we had at the time. So I always support local business and support what's right, and that's why I spoke to that at April 19. But I do support this because it does set in place some rules that we can't work outside of. We work by the rules.
Thank you, Councillor Littley. Councillor Mann, did you want to contribute at all to this? You're right. Okay. Anybody else? Councillor Robertson, do you want? Sorry, Councillor Charles.
Yeah, I'm going to go the other way and not vote for it. I think it's essential that as we represent the community, we have an opportunity to make a submission if we want to, just like other people will make submission to the CAP, we make a submission. It doesn't have to be, we certainly can't cause them to make a decision that they see as incorrect. They'll look at it their own way. It'll just be a little advisory coming from people who live in the district and understand the area. Section or the second or third part of this recommendation covers that. It seems like this one's really not necessary at all. Anyway, I'm going to vote against that one. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Charles. If there's no more debate on that, Councillor Robertson, do you want to close the debate? Okay, I'll put that recommendation 2 to the floor. All those in favour? Can you just hold your hands up there? And those against? 2, 3. That's carried. Recommendation 3. I'll take that as read for you rather than reading it all out for you. Would someone like to move that way? Please. Councillor Glasbrook, thank you. And Councillor Henderson seconding it. Do you want to speak to it, Councillor Glasbrook? Councillor Henderson? Does anybody want to speak to it? Councillor Robertson and then Councillor Kemp.
Yeah, Mayor, I don't understand what this one is. No, what are we saying here? That the CEO or any person acting in that position to do anything necessary to discharging the council's functions and duties, well, don't they do that anyway? I mean, what is the point of this? Part 3.
It's in relation to other applications the council may receive or be the adjoining landowner, in particular for the example that's, and obviously attachment A details the delegation. There's other provisions in the Development Act, that's specifically in regards to applications that come from the Fleurieu Regional Assessment Panel. So we could fall into any category where the Fleurieu Regional Assessment Panel is undertaking an assessment and we fall within that 60-metre radius as an adjoining landowner. So we may want to provide a submission in those accounts, and this gives the delegation for me to submit those. Obviously, after working with council or having a workshop if it's of interest to the chamber, or not submitting one.
Yeah, fine. I've listened to what you said, but to me, still, I mean, I'm glad you understand it. I clearly don't, but I think that it's a very, the wording is terrible, I think.
It is
very clear.
Unfortunately, in terms of delegation, you have to actually, there's a formal wording that's required for any delegation. You as a council have a number of responsibilities, functions and duties under a number of pieces of legislation, and you go through a process of delegating a number of those to me. And it's the same sort of wording, unfortunately.
Thank you. Councillor Kemp.
Thank you, Mayor Jenkins. Through to the CEO again on this matter. If I understood you correctly, and there may be a little bit of nuance here, that you're saying that the delegation is to give you authority to either bring to or not bring to the chamber a proposal for us to make comment on. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Thank you. One of the things I'm sort of a little bit against delegations. At times they are required and they are needed, but other times I think what delegations do is take the power out of the elected members' hands and give it to the CEO. And sometimes I think, shouldn't be that way at all. I think, if any applications come through of notifications from these other authorities, they should come to the chamber by default and for the chamber to decide. We're told on many occasions that we are the conduit to our community and we need to talk to them. And if there's a development going on in our town, which we're adjacent owner to, then the community wants to talk to their members about it and then talk about it. But if the CEO decides no, not to bring it to the chamber for discussions, that eliminates us to represent our community in that context of for or against a development. So I'm not supporting this motion. I think anything that comes from the Fleurieu Assessment Panel or the state, anything to do with us, which affects us as a landowner adjoining, we should come to the chamber automatically for us to talk about, to also seek feedback from our community, irrespective of what the proposal is.
Thank you, Councillor Kemp. Are there any more questions or any further debate on the motion? Councillor Glasbrook, do you want to close the debate? In that case, I'll put it to the floor. All those in favour? Keep your hands up. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And those against? 1, 2, 3, 4. That's carried. Thank you very much.
Call a division, please.
All those in favour, please stand. Councillor Mann. Councillor Littley. I'll just wait for Karina, sorry. Councillor Mann, Councillor Littley, Councillor Glasbrook, Councillor Henderson and Councillor Schofield. Against, Councillor Hales, Councillor Robertson, Councillor Charles and Councillor Kemp. That motion is carried. Thank you. We now move to 9.6, which is the rating review final report. Can I just ask before I look at doing this, when we look at recommendation 2, is there anything out of that that anyone wants to pull out and discuss? If not, I'll do the 3 recommendations on block. Councillor Glasbrook,
Yes, I'd rather do them,
you'd rather do them separately?
well, certainly exclude number 3 anyway.
Sorry, exclude number 3.
From my point of view, I'm not sure about other members.
Are you happy to do recommendation 1 and 2 on block?
Yes,
Yep. You're not? Okay, we'll do them separately. So recommendation 1 is receiving and noting the report, a review on the basis of rating completion report. So moved by Councillor Robertson and seconded by Councillor Kemp. Either of you want to speak to that? Anyone want to speak to receiving the report? Councillor Glasbrook?
yeah, I'll speak to it now. It's a question in a way. It says in the agenda here, just give me a second to find the right page, in relation to the commercial, the business advocates preferred the view that they were satisfied that the current commercial differential rate of 130% of the residential rate, on the basis that additional income raised continues to be used to advocate economic development, tourism and commercial opportunities within the council region, which is in a sense true. They certainly did say that, but I've just been reading the letter that was sent in relation to the feedback that they provided, and they made it fairly clear in that letter that in granting the the approval of 130%, that they wanted to have more input into how that money was spent. So, and they've also asked 4 questions. So I was just wondering, are we going to be assessing that correspondence that we received and answering those questions and taking that into consideration? And should we do that before we decide this tonight?
Graham, did you? Yeah. No, the questions, obviously, it was determined on tonight's decision in terms of the chamber. So if council does support continuing with the current circumstance of the differential rate, then obviously we then would need to work with Business Victor Harbour in regards to council's decision and look at the best approach for that mechanism to be put in place and also respond to the other questions.
Okay, thank you. Well, as long as elected members are aware that although they did support that it wasn't just an open, yes, we support it, but we support it within relation, as long as we get a little bit of a say, well, not a little bit of fair say on how that money is spent. So I just wanted to make that point and ask that question. Thank you.
Any further questions or comments on recommendation 1? Councillor Robertson, did you want to close the debate? No. I'll put it to the floor. All those in favour? Those against? That's carried. Thank you. Recommendation 2, that council retains the rating structure as follows. Take that as read. You're moving that way, councillor. Thank you. And seconding that, councillor Littley. Either of you want to speak to that? Councillor Kemp.
Thanks, Mayor Jenkins. Yes, I support this as it is. I believe it's a good rating structure, and I think it works quite well for our community, for the size of our community and the number of ratepayers we have, and the diversity of different type of land holdings that we have in our council areas. I think it does what it needs to be doing, and it gives opportunity as well for supporting our local businesses, but also looks at supporting our primary production as well. As they go through some various hard times. Yes, we understand there are some hobby farmers out there, but we just can't get it down to how we really want it. But this has worked quite well over the years, and I think it works extremely well. And I think we might as well. I think we should keep it. Changing it and playing with it would only cause further problems, I believe. Thank you.
Thank you, councillor Littley. Did you want to speak to it?
Yeah, this is the item that I did want to draw out, just so it could be spoken out. I do absolutely support this current rating structure. I just know that obviously in the media, and it's being very hot today with regards to primary production differential rate, or for us, the primary production differential rate at 90%. I just wanted to ensure that it was vocalised and known with the gallery and people looking online viewing the live stream. Yeah, it is a good structure. It is considered structure, and it has been well discussed and debated as we lead up to this point as well. It's not like we've just rolled over and the same structure again. We have talked this through, making a point of that for the sake of things that are happening amongst neighbours and the like.
Thank you, Councillor Littley. Does anybody else have any questions or commentary? Councillor Robertson.
Yes, Mayor, the item 6, the rate capping. I wanted to ask Kelly if the rate capping has been extended to the to primary production and as well as for the residential.
Through the Mayor, there's a later report around the annual business plan, and that has been included in the rating policy for council to consider when we get to that item. So we've added in the primary production with the residential.
Good. So what is can we either delete where appropriate and perhaps put in, replace where appropriate to put in all property classes? So that would mean that it's extended to the primary production as well, or do you think that we've?
Are you looking to make an amendment, Councillor Robertson?
Sorry?
Are you looking to make an amendment?
Yes, because I think that where appropriate doesn't seem to be saying much, whereas what we needed to make it clear was that rate capping at 15% for all property classes.
I'll just let Kelly respond to that, and if you're making an amendment, you'll need a seconder, but I'll just let Kelly give you some more information about the consequences of that.
Thank you, through the Mayor. So the reason we've left it fairly generic in this is because we're talking about the basic rating structure of council. Council can decide in any year when doing its annual business plan and budget and rating policy to allow additional categories to be included or excluded from that rate capping clause within the annual business plan. And that gives you the ability to have a look at the economic drivers and the current situation and see whether a rate cap is actually something that should be offered to those different land use categories. If you made it a blanket all within here, it would make it difficult to make that decision in your rating policy each year, and means that you would also be giving that rate cap to large multinational companies and other land use categories. So it would limit your ability to make decisions on a annual basis with current situation being known.
Great.
Okay. Any further commentary or questions on that? Councillor Hales?
Thank you, Mayor Jenkins. This proposed structure, which is our existing structure, I've never been a fan of. But it would seem, having gone through the review process, that we're going to leave it as is, which I'm happy to get on board with. But I would put the comments around the fact that rates are raised through local government's coercive power of taxation upon its population. These are powers that aren't given to any other form of organisation, whether it be a business, a non-for-profit, anything else. It's given to an elected a body that has an elected board, an elected from the community group of people to govern those funds. And so if our business community are happy to pay a higher differential, absolutely, we'll put that towards the bettering of our community. We'll put it towards bettering economic outcomes. And if that's providing them with better people who have been raised in a better way and provide better human resource to these businesses, that's a great economic outcome. If it's providing better business services by making sure that it's easier for business to deal with council, great outcome for business. If it's in investment attraction, getting those bigger cornerstone employers into our region, great. Might lead to some competition, but better overall economically for our city, which is what we aim to do. So I would just say that I would push back against the commercial differential is a fund for Business Victor Harbor and Business Victor Harbor alone, because that's not the case. If Chamber of Commerce's were given the power to coerce money out of the community, great for them, but they're not. there's an elected, a civilian representation put in place to govern money raised out of our community. So I think that it should be caveated with that. So I'll vote in favour of this, but my intention is clear in that this is not just money for Business Victor Harbour, it's money for the community. Yeah, that's all that needs to be said.
Thank you, councillor Hales. Councillor Mann, did you want to say anything? No? Does anybody else want to contribute to the debate? Councillor Kemp, would you like to close the debate? No? In that case, I put recommendation 3 to the floor. All those in favour? Sorry, recommendation 2, I beg your pardon. Recommendation 2, all those in favour? Those against? That's carried unanimously, thank you. We now move to recommendation 3, that council considers an increase in the vacant land differential 223, subject to investigation into the date for properties developed within a set period. Would someone like to move that way? Councillor Henderson. Thank you. And seconding that, Councillor Schofield, thank you. Either of you want to speak to that? No, does anybody want to speak to that? Councillor Charles, Councillor Kemp, then Councillor Robertson.
Yeah, this was a bright idea I had at one of our workshops. And I'd just like to ask Kelly whether she thinks it's wise after all, whether there's any gain or whether it's just going to be a break-even situation.
Through the Mayor, so putting into place any extra administrative assessment will likely cause extra costs for council in terms of providing a rebate. So it will require resources to actually look into the assessment when people put in their applications to say we've built, can we have a rebate, etc. I don't know if I'd call it a break even. It depends on what you're trying to achieve. So if we're trying to encourage people that buy vacant land to build on it quickly, it may have an impact, but it's probably not as significant a driver as other things like federal grant funding and state grant funding and first home buyers grants and all those type of things in getting people to build. It would not potentially have a huge impact within the council area, but that's not to say we shouldn't investigate and see how some other councils do it.
Thank you for that, Kelly. I think other councillors will speak more proficiently at this, but I was more concerned about raising more income for the council and the tasks and the things that we intend to do. And I wasn't really, I mean, I was trying to see that the land turned over, of course, but I think it's such a small figure that it's not really going to encourage people to do very much anyway, having thought about it.
Councillor Kemp.
Thank you, Mayor Jenkins. I won't be supporting this, even though it's an investigation process. I think, as Kelly has said, the cost benefit analysis of actually doing this is going to outweigh the benefits that we get out of it. And the council will not raise any additional funds because we've got to give it back to the property owners later on when they build. So if it's a differential rate of 10%, which may be $50 or $100 to an owner, you know, it saves, but then when they build and all that, they get the money back. So I don't see the benefit in it. And I think the cost to the staff and the amount of time that will take to minister this process for little benefit to council. And I think very little benefit to the community, the people who have vacant land. And I don't think getting $100 off my rates is going to entice me to spend $300,000 to build something. I think there are other measures around that we could do that. So I won't be supporting this motion.
Thank you, Councillor Kemp. Councillor Robertson.
Thank you, Mayor. Essentially, Councillor Kemp has said largely what I was going to say, because I can only imagine how tricky it's going to be for the administration to provide a rebate and how much. And also, I just looking at this sentence here, and again, I come to the situation as, what does it mean? It's the council is going to consider an increase on the vacant land differential, subject to an investigation into the provision of a rebate for properties developed within a set period. Well, you know, what set period, what investigation, and what provision of rebate? And to me, it's all too complicated. It's not, it doesn't make sense, and it's going to be administratively very costly. So that's why I'm voting against it. I understand the intent, which was to, you know, a person buys a piece of vacant land, and if they don't build on it quickly, they're going to pay this higher rate, which is Councillor Kemp said maybe $100, and then we're going to figure out a way of giving them back 100. To me, not worth it.
Thank you. Councillor Glasbrook?
Yes, agree. I agree. I won't be supporting this. Firstly, because I don't support increasing it. I think 150% is enough. And the other reason is that if the property is developed, its value would go up, and they probably won't get a rebate anyway, because instead of being a $150,000 block, it's now worth $450,000. You won't give them a rebate, as far as I work it out. So thank you.
Any further questions? Debate, Councillor Hales?
Thank you, Mayor Jenkins. Yeah, at the start of this process, I was vocal in saying that I absolutely am in favour of increasing the vacant land differential. I think the vacant land differential is that motivation, I guess, in terms of we have zoned a certain number of blocks in our city for the building of residential housing. If you're not going to use it for that purpose, then absolutely you should pay a premium on your rates, rather than us being required to open up more and more land on the outskirts of our urban area. The land that we already have zoned to be built on should be built on. That's why it's there. It only increases the pressure on the non-built on area if people decide to buy a block to build their house on and buy a block next to it as their future investment or something else. So I think that absolutely increasing the vacant land differential was a good idea, but as outlined by Kelly, the purpose suddenly void because you're spending that money administering a rebate system that statistically isn't going to provide that much extra benefit. So I don't think I'll be supporting this motion as it stands, but moving forward, I will still be advocating for land differential.
Thank you, Councillor Hales. Any further comments or questions? Councillor Henderson, do you want to close the debate? No. In that case, I'll put that to the floor. All those in favour? Those against? That motion is lost. Thank you. Now move to 9.7, which is the asset management plans, public consultation and adoption. And I know, Councillor Glasbrook, you've got an alternative motion in line with the Audit Committee recommendations. And I'll just wait for Karina to perhaps put that up on the screen.
I'm happy to move point 1, which is to note the community engagement summary.
Yep, sure.
And I foreshadow that I do have a different or alternative motion for point number 2.
Yep, all right, then we'll do it. I'm happy to do it that way. So you're moving point 1. Do I have a seconder for recommendation 1? Thank you, Councillor Robertson. Either of you want to speak to the public consultation report? No. Does anybody want to speak to that? If not, I'll put the recommendation 1 to the floor. All those in favour? Those against? And recommendation 2?
So yes, I'd like to move that Council does not endorse the asset management plans in line with Audit Committee feedback, undertaking the following. There's up on the board there. Dot point number 1, review of capital works planned at least over the next 5 years to realign with Council's financial liability appetite to a maximum of 100%. Review of asset management plans and long-term financial plan prior to community consultation in alignment with above. Review of the decision framework for inclusion in the capital works program. Add clarity to the significant project section of the long-term financial plan. And options and subject to grant funding and financial sustainability, noting that they are not fully funded.
Okay. Do you want to speak to that, Councillor Glasbrook, before I ask for a seconder?
Yes, I can do. So we had a special audit committee meeting today, which looked at item 9.7 and 9.11, which is coming up a little bit later in the agenda. And all three of the independent members were concerned with the expenditure that this council had planned for and have put into a draft, those two draft policies, and gave this feedback. So they obviously, as it says, recommended for us to go back and have another look and to try and keep within our forecast financial liabilities percentages. So I won't speak any more now. If there's any questions, I'm happy to answer them.
Thank you, Councillor Glasbrook. Do I have someone to second that? Thank you, Councillor Robertson. Do you want to speak to that?
Yes, Mayor, I didn't know anything about this audit committee meeting, but it makes absolute sense to me that there are a number of steps in which we need to be looking at what's in both the long-term financial plan and also the asset management plan. You know, we've got to go out to community consultation at some stage or other. We ought to do that. We ought to be looking at the in total of what's happening and what are the projects that we really need to do. And as mentioned before, one of the ones that the most important to me project that we have to do over the next 4 to 5 years is the enterprise resource program, the replacement of the software for this council. It's such a crucial project. It's hardly there, and to me, you know, it's going to cost millions. So that is for me, the single most important project that we have to focus on, not only because of the costs involved, but because it's going to have such a profound effect on the productivity and the output of the staff while the changeover is taking place. But yeah, definitely, I think we, by adopting the asset management plans as they're provided here, when we haven't been out to the public consultation and the other second or third one that was mentioned in the audit committee, the in toto amount of, it's very tricky this year, but we do have a lot of unknowns and they're all in millions of dollars, and we need to be very careful. So I fully support it. It's a very smart suggestion.
Do I have any further questions? Councillor Kemp.
Thank you, Mayor Jenkins. I do have a question for Councillor Glasbrook. The first dot point rings alarm bells for me because we're looking at 5 years where we can maximum out our liability to 100%, $30 million in 5 years. And did the audit committee look at the modelling of the ability of the council, the ratepayers to pay for that? That if we max out to in 5 years and the risks that would happen if that went that way, where the other plan looks at over 10 years that we max out at 100%. So I'm just wondering whether the audit committee actually looked at what they're trying to achieve here, because if that's the case, in the next 5 years, we were building everything that's we got on our plans, we maxed out, we have no ability to borrow against for anything in the future or things like that. So did the audit committee have any modelling to look at why they made it 5 years at the no more than 100%? I understand why they didn't go above 100%, because you can't really go above what more than you can actually afford to borrow. But I thought just running about the risks of doing it in 5 year period, if that's what that statement is in giving the council ability to do. If you could just expand on that if possible.
Yes, thank you. Yes, I can. So the reason that they suggested a 5-year period was because most of the planned works, such as the Arts and Cultural Centre, the Main Street, and I forget what the last project was.
The rec centre.
Yeah, the sports centre were programmed in for the next 5 years. And so that was where the pressure was getting put onto the budget. And so this is actually going into the long-term financial plan a little bit, what you're talking about, which is actually item 9.11, but I'll discuss it now. The table on page 15 of the long-term financial plan, where it had borrowing levels, didn't include most of the expenditure related to the Arts and Cultural Centre and the Sports and Rec Centre. It only included a figure that would get us into the 100%, under 100%. So if we expended those projects, and we would be well and truly over 100%. So that concerned the audit committee, and they asked council to, go back and have another look, because they were concerned about our ongoing sustainability. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, as a better clarification than what the statement actually says, I'll just continue talking if I may.
Can I just ask Kelly to just fill in some more of what Councillor Glasbrook was saying? It might help you a bit more.
Thank you. Through the Mayor, yeah, just to add to what Councillor Glasbrook was saying, principally the Audit Committee were concerned with that level of expenditure in the first 5 years and the need to spread that out further. And so it's that expenditure in the first 5 years, and particularly the next couple of years, that actually has that major impact further down the long-term financial plan in future years. So not looking at going above the 100% in any of the years, but just principally trying to spread that expenditure that's in that first clump of years out through the rest of the plan.
Thank you, Kelly. Carry on, David.
Thank you, Mayor Jenkins. Look, I think I'll support this on the principle that we are reviewing it and having further discussions and looking at the modelling that will come with it. But I'd just like to reiterate with the previous elected members from the last term of council under the previous CEO, Mr. Maxwell, that he made a statement along the lines when I was in the gallery one night, saying that council of this size with the ratepayer base that we have, we can only do one major project every 4 years. And he stuck to that gun, and that's why he kept, I suppose, the borrowings down to certain levels. This is flying in the face of the previous executive officer's position of how we manage our liabilities and things like that. So I think reviewing it and putting it on hold for the time being will give us an opportunity to really look at that and really understand, was Mr. Maxwell right in his statement that this council, due to its ratepayer base, can only do one major project every 4 years? I think it'd be a good discussion and look at if that's possible or not. But thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Kemp. Are there any further questions or any further commentary? Councillor Hales and then Councillor Mann.
Thank you, Mayor Jenkins. Sorry, Councillor Mann, to just beat you there. I had the pleasure of serving with on a council that Graham was the CEO of, Mr. Maxwell. And certainly he had many strengths, absolutely. But I think it's best to keep the presence of one CEO at one point in time. And at the moment, we are blessed to have Victoria in our presence, and we should take on her advice as well. And the staff which we have currently. Yeah, put 10 economists in a room, you'll get 10 different answers on things. Possibly the same with CEOs, who knows? I think the politics of debt and deficit are very interesting, especially when we think about government entities versus what most of us experience at a household level or individual or business level. The appetite for debt and deficit in the average household when investing in things like bricks and mortar, the house that we live in, would far exceed ratios that we believe are comfortable for government. And while I'm certainly not expressing that local government should have 400% debt, because that would be horrific, absolutely horrific. It is true that our income as a council is far more guaranteed than a household borrowing for a mortgage for their home. And so therefore our capacity to repay the debt far exceeds that of most households, I'd say, in our community. And therefore, when we spend with borrowed money, absolutely, we should make the right investments. We should make those investments that benefit the community over a long period of time, similar to parents buying a house that they want to raise a family in. We shouldn't be borrowing stacks of money in order to fund services. It'd be like a family borrowing a ton of money to go on a big holiday that they can't afford. Absolutely. That type of spending is rash and wasteful. And so therefore, in looking at what we're spending money on in a capital sense, we should look at the operating effect of that as well. But to use 100% as a specific number, I think could be unwise from time to time. It's great rhetorically, but not necessarily that grounded in truth or fact. It's a number that's nice and round. So I'm happy to go along with this process and the motion that has come out of the audit committee, but I also want to depoliticise the debt and deficit conversation that we often have.
Thank you, Councillor Hales. Councillor Mann.
Thank you, Mayor Jenkins. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can. Thank you.
Excellent. I guess my concern around this one, I greatly appreciate our need for being financially sustainable. And at our last workshops, when we discussed the asset management plans and long-term financial plans, I was completely on board around how we can do the process better to ensure we're being financially sustainable in what projects we're taking on and our renewals and how we plan. And I think I know in this recommendation, there's a note about that there's broad work planned to develop a framework for the inclusion of new projects, including criteria and a decision matrix to help council in balancing the community needs and expectations. And so I think from my understanding, I could be wrong, we're looking to undertake that work, but the time frame for getting it ready this term around is a bit too soon. However, I guess further my concern around this is whether it's completely coming from that financial sustainability place. And I know the audit committee does a great job, and I definitely appreciate their feedback and happy to take it on board. But again, I guess just drawing upon Councillor Hale's views around the politicisation of debt, and I think it's an important note that we need to keep educating our community on, is that whilst it could be easy for someone to run a debt campaign against any of us as elected members and say that we're getting the community into too much debt spending, and obviously we have to be responsible in the debt we're getting into, but I think a lot of it comes down to educating our community about debt, specifically in the context of local government, which, as Councillor Hale said, is very different from your day-to-day mum and dad business owners. And I think we can use debt in an excellent way to spread the cost of projects across generations. And I think we need to keep educating our community about this, because pretty much what it means for them, for the day-to-day ratepayers of today, is that we're not overrating them for assets that are going to be used by generations in the past. And as I'm hoping to, if I live a long and happy life, and if I in Victor as well, I guess I would want to be paying for the projects across my lifetime, instead of all the ratepayers now paying for them, and then and future generations are just going to receive the benefit because we've overrated the generations before. So I think we need to keep educating the community about the use of debt. But I think around this recommendation, I'm just not entirely sure around those implications. And I guess also I'm looking for maybe the CEO's comments about specifically the recommendation and any views that she may have. That's okay. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Mann.
Through the Mayor, I very much support the recommendations coming out of the Audit Committee. I think obviously the asset management plans have been out for consultation already. We didn't get very much feedback at all. But now that with the alignment with our long-term financial plan, it shows that we are trying to do too much in the next 5 years. Council needs to revisit the next 5 years and look to prioritise a number of those projects. It's not saying the council can't do the new projects it wants to do. It just can't do them all at once. It needs to spread them out a little bit more. And I think it is extremely important for the council to take another visit at these documents. There is no, and I said to the audit committee, there's no legislative requirement that says you have to get them endorsed and adopted now. The priority is your annual business plan and budget that has timeframes. These documents need your time and also the education piece for our community. So I think you need to take that bit extra time to look at them again.
Thank you.
Thank you. Are there, Councillor Charles?
I couldn't agree more than with Councillor Hales and Mann and others. There's a lot of cheap money around at present moment. It's ever so tempting. It's never happened before. Probably it's going to stick around for a while. But whilst we're able to reach in and get loans at such a cheap rate, it's as I said, tempting, but also scary in the sense that with so much money being provided to so many councils and government departments and the public, the industry, building and architecturally designing are quite happy to put their prices up. And so it's really a matter of value for money is what we should be striving for whatever we do. There's just, I think quite often a lot of tenders come in, well, we've got plenty of work at present moment, we'll put an extra 20,000 on that or even more. And I'm certain that in certain industries there's communication between the half a dozen or the 12 people who are potential quoting for a particular job. So I just think it's essential that we look, along with what's been said tonight, we look very carefully at every project and try and get some value for money out of each one. And there's different ways of building. And I'd also be very keen, and this is kind of slightly off the subject, but to look at some of our current assets that are costing us money and try and see if we can do some cost-effective things to make them more productive and not losing so much cash or costing us so much money, if that makes any sense. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Charles. If there's no more, Councillor Kemp,
I have a question, please.
You've got a question?
Yep. Thank you. Mainly through to the CEO, to Kelly, I suppose. It's along the lines of the current commentary that's surrounding the economists, the banks, the Reserve Bank about the future in the next 2 to 3 years, depending on what happens globally. Are we going to be using some of that rhetoric, what they're saying in our planning, to give us a bit of an indication of what the next 3 or 4 years may hold when all of a sudden inflation goes up, interest rates go up, and we'll be hit hard if we have massive liabilities outstanding. So I'm just wondering, will you take into account any of that rhetoric and have it available for part of our discussions to project ahead as to what the impacts may look like, to give us an idea when we make our decisions? Thank you.
Through the Mayor, so we did include some commentary in the long-term financial plan around sensitivity to interest rates. And so that can definitely be built into the review of both the asset management plans and the long-term financial plan if that's what's endorsed tonight in terms of going forward. So we will generally take into account any current assumptions that we have, any forecasts that come through from different bodies and industry bodies within local government. So yes.
Thank you, Kelly. Are there any further questions? Councillor Robertson?
Yes, Mayor, if I could ask a question.
Yeah, it's a question because you've seconded the motion.
Yeah, that's all right. Yep, a question to Councillor Glasbrook. The second review, the second audit committee recommendation up there, that the review of the asset management plans and long-term financial plan, did that and long-term financial plan relate to the operating costs of some of the capital items that were being proposed?
No. No, it's really, in relation to the fact that the asset management plans don't currently align with the long-term financial plan. So it was, yeah.
Councillor Glassbrook, did you want to close the debate? No. In that case, I'll put the motion to the floor. All those in, sorry? Yes, yep. The motion that's on the board, on your, that's up there. Put that to the floor. All those in favour? Those against? That's carried. Thank you. We now move to 9.8, which is the 2020-2021 March budget review. And I'll do that recommendation on block. That council receive and note the report, and that council endorse the 2021 December budget review as presented in the financial statements at attachment A. Would someone like to move that way? Thank you, Councillor Hales. And seconded, Councillor Schofield. Councillor Hales, do you want to speak to that? Councillor Schofield? Anyone want to speak to that? In that case, I'll put it to the floor. All those in favour? Those against? That's carried. Thank you. Are you for favour or against? Were you for favour or against? Your hands went up and it stayed up. You're for it. Okay, that's carried. Thank you. 9.9, draft fees and charges register. I'll do that recommendation on block as well, unless anybody objects. Is there a problem, Councillor Robertson?
That was me, Mayor Jenkins. Sorry, I didn't realise you moved that last item on block. My fault. I'd like to let everyone know that I wanted to vote against that.
Oh, sorry, Councillor Glassbrook. The 9.9 draft fees and charges register. The recommendation I'll do on block, unless anybody doesn't want me to. The first recommendation being that we note the receive and note the draft fees and charges register, and that the second recommendation that council endorse the 2021-22 draft fees and charges register effective 1st of July 2021 as presented. Would someone like to move that? You're happy to move on block, Councillor Henderson? Thank you. And seconding that? Thank you, Councillor Robertson. Either of you want to speak to it? No, anyone want to speak to it? Councillor Charles?
It's just about registration of cats. I note that it says here, and of course we've all read it, that the registration for cats will increase by, I think it's 12.35% annually until such time as it becomes in line with what people are paying for dogs. And in the explanation, in the recommendation here, information pack, it says that, you know, we've got a maintenance of a dog park. We don't have a cat park. We've got completed dog park shelter. We don't have a cat park shelter. We don't have a cat diet survey, and we don't have cat bag dispensers to provide and to cost us money. I just feel it's unfair to, and we also notice that cats, there's a 40%, I think, somewhere here, or cats comprise 20% of our total registered animal base and resemble similar expenditure patterns to dogs. I don't understand how that works, but cats, we want people to come forward and register their cats so that the cats can be returned if they're caught and they're chipped. Most cats are owned by elderly people. I don't know whether that's a fair statement to make, but I know that cats are a company for generally, how can one not be sexist over this one? I love my cat, which decided to join our household, didn't buy it, didn't go out looking for a cat, it just joined us. I've always been a dog person. I love the cat very much, but I can see that it's very important to an older person, particularly an older woman, to have their cat. And I do think that by bringing this price up to some $87, is a lot to, it's a stretch. I'm having trouble describing this because I just don't think it's right, and I don't know how to really argue the point. I know that this supervising of these regulations costs money. I just don't think it should be thrown onto the cat population where there's elderly cat owners who can be encouraged to register at a reasonable figure but may hide their cats or not declare they have a cat, which is what it looks like at this stage. I mean, you don't hear a cat barking, do you? You know, you got a cat in the house, how would you know? The thing's lying on the bed asleep, it's been there all day. So I really think this is just unnecessary. The rest of the fees and charges I'm happy with, you can't do much about it.
Thank you, Councillor Charles. Does anybody else want to speak to this motion? If not, I'll put the recommendation to the floor en bloc. All those in favour? Those against? That's carried, thank you. We now move to 9.10, the draft 2021-22 annual business plan and budget, the public consultation. And I've got a little note on here. Kelly will talk to this. So Kelly, I might ask you to talk to the recommendation just prior to me asking for someone to move it and second it. Thank you.
Thank you, through the Mayor. So in terms of what we've presented tonight, the annual business plan and budget has been updated after the last budget workshop. There is a deficit still in terms of the $194,700 deficit. Discussions at the last budget workshop involved the discussion around an additional payroll. We've since had discussions with our auditors and had another look at accounting standards, and the additional payroll is actually in this financial year based on when the payroll period finishes. So there's a bit of a difference between ATO guidelines and payment summaries, which is what our payroll section we're working on. When we've looked at it from an accounting standard and financial statement and budget point of view, that extra payroll actually occurs within the 2021 financial year. So we've been able to reduce next year's budget by that amount. We're still at the amount that we had included. We're still working through the figures in terms of what that looks like for the end of financial year this year, but that's one of the big changes since the last budget workshop. So I just wanted to highlight that as one of the discussions we had that was a particular impost on next year's budget.
Thank you, Kelly. I'll take that recommendation on block, given that the first one is noting the plan and budget report. So if there's no objections, I'll look for a mover for recommendation 1 and 2. Thank you, Councillor Henderson. And to second that? Thank you, Councillor Schofield. Councillor Henderson, do you want to speak to it? Councillor Schofield? Does anybody want to speak to it or have any questions? Councillor Kemp?
Thank you. A question to Kelly along the lines that you explained the 400,000 aspect on the salaries. At our last workshop, we were looking at a deficit over 900,000, down to 194. Let's keep it round figures, 200. So you explained the 400, still 300,000 outstanding, which I can't seem to find where it's gone or what you got rid of in all that aspect. Could you just explain that extra 300,000 disappearance?
Thank you. So through the Mayor, so the additional amounts that we've been able to find is administration went away and had another look at the budget, went through, removed a few items, cut down, made some savings in different areas, but also did a comprehensive review of our estimated income. And so what we did was have a look at the current tracking of this financial year, and we actually had underestimated a number of the income lines based on where we thought we were when we first did the first draft of the budget. So we have increased a number of income lines across the council area, as well as having notification of additional grants that we are likely to receive. So with the release of the federal budget, we were basically, one of the advice was in there is that there would be additional financial assistance grants and that they would be paid early and be a bigger advance than we would normally expect. So, and that next year there would be additional grant funding as well. So we've made some conservative changes to that based on the notifications that have come through for both this year and next year. But most of those two changes, the salaries and wages and additional income, as well as some savings that administration went through and cut out a few smaller amounts across the entire budget to try and get down to a deficit. We didn't quite get there, to get down to a break-even position, sorry, we didn't quite get there, but in terms of where we were sitting, I'm fairly comfortable in that going out to public consultation, knowing that we will still get, we're still waiting on our final revisits for rates and our final position of growth as well. So that may help our position in the end as well.
Second question, please. Thanks, Mayor Jenkins. Kelly, with our annual business plan, we're looking at growth of 1%. Are we being too conservative considering the climate now with valuations and properties? And I'm just wondering whether being one, because actually maybe could give a better indication if we actually raise it 1.5% or something like that, may give a clearer, a more accurate reality of what the marketplace is like at the moment. Because in 2 years' time, it'll all change again, and we have to lower the growth back down again. So I'm just wondering whether we should reflect the actual growth happening. Not, yeah, I think we're just too conservative. Thanks.
So through the Mayor, we have included the growth that we currently have coming in, which is 1.8. And so we've actually included that as well to within the last review in terms of what we had. I actually have increased that to 2%. Within the draft budget that is here, based knowing that we're going to have some revisits coming forward. Hesitant to take it any higher than that without knowing exactly what the Valuer General, what revisits the Valuer General is going to finish and complete in time to report to us by the 30th of June.
Thank you for that, and I do stand corrected of not being up to speed exactly what you've written. I do apologise for that. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Robertson.
Thank you, Mayor. Kelly, I was looking at the public consultation, and I think we're doing a pretty good job on the arts and culture program with public consultation. Here we've got on page 84 how we're going to engage in that public consultation. We've got a public meeting on the 17th of June. Is that going to be a meeting is that going to be a daytime or nighttime meeting? And is there going to be a face-to-face engagement with the business sector?
So through the Mayor, in terms of the public meeting, that will be a nighttime meeting. Usually those public forums are around 6:30. So we would be looking at doing that at a similar time to allow as many people to come. We do specialised engagement with key stakeholders. So whilst there might not be a face-to-face meeting in here, we can consider it as part of that with Business Victor and then going out to the broader business community.
Okay.
Is there any further commentary or questions on that recommendation, Braden? Or Councillor Mann?
Thank you, Mayor Jenkins. Yeah, no, I just want to thank the administration for putting in the extra information about the differential rate on page 24 and on the breakdown of those projects. I think it's important because it is such that feedback that we've previously had and the interest in it. I think it is important to let the community know all the different projects we're spending it on, and it isn't necessarily just the contributions to Business Victor Harbour, but I think it's to look at the different ways we're spending it, and I guess for the community to provide us that feedback if they're happy with how we're spending that money and looking at future years, how we develop and potentially change the use of those funds. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Mann. If there's no further commentary, Councillor Henderson, do you want to close the debate? No. I'll put that recommendation en bloc to the floor. All those in favour? Those against? That's carried. Thank you. We now go to We now go to 9.11, which is the draft long-term financial plan, public consultation. I'll do the first recommendation, receiving and noting the report, and then I believe that Councillor Glasbrook has an alternative motion for the second recommendation, as we did with the asset management plan. So the first recommendation that we receive and note the report. Councillor Schofield, thank you very much, and Councillor Kemp seconding that. Either of you want to speak to that? Anybody want to speak to that? All those in favour? That's carried. All those against? It's carried. Thank you. Councillor Glasbrook, do you want to put your alternative recommendation?
Yes, thank you. It's actually exactly the same recommendation as 9.7, because those two items are, as I mentioned, tied together, and it's really just a matter of going back to the beginning and reassessing our priorities and aligning these two policies together. So again, if there's any questions, I'll answer them, but that's nothing I need to say.
Thank you. Do I have a seconder for that motion? Councillor Schofield? Do you want to speak to that at all? No? Does anybody want to speak to that? Anyone questions for Councillor Glasbrook? If not, I'll put it to the floor. All those in favour? Those against? That's carried. Thank you. We now move to Community and Development, 10.1 Victor Harbour Community Grants Program. I'll do that recommendation en bloc because the first one is receiving and noting the report. The second recommendation is endorsing the 4 applications for funding as specified. Moving that way, Councillor Henderson. And seconding Councillor Hales. Either of you want to speak to that? Does anybody want to speak to it or have any questions? If Councillor Robertson.
Yeah, Mayor. I guess to me, it's some of the same. It follows from what we're doing here. The same with the sporting grants program. That is, it's pretty small amounts of money, and yeah, it goes to providing small amounts of equipment and that sort of thing. But to me, I wonder if these grants programs, and maybe it's the way that they're channeled or promoted or whatever, that you need something like a piece of equipment, so you ask for that. But where are we going in relation to spending funds on items of equipment, or where are we going in terms of building stronger institutions? The various organisations here. So that's my comment about it, is that it's very small amounts of money. I just wish that we were achieving more with this with these small amounts of money.
Thank you, Councillor Robertson. Any other comments, questions? If not, I'll put it to the floor. All those in favour? Those against? That's carried. Thank you. (10.2) is the Arts and Culture Officer position resourcing. I'll do the recommendations en bloc because the first recommendation is receiving and noting the report. Somebody like to move recommendation 1 and 2 en bloc? Thank you, Councillor Henderson. And seconded by? Do I have a seconder for this? Thank you, Councillor Schofield. Councillor Henderson, do you want to speak to it? Councillor Schofield? Does anybody want to speak to the recommendation? Councillor Robertson?
Yeah, Mayor. As such, I don't have any real objection to to what's being proposed here. But I do think it would have been better off if we'd been doing this, if we postponed this recommendation until after we've got a couple of really important studies or whatever being done right now. And if they're done well, we should be able to identify from out of those consultancies what sort of people we're going to be looking at and whether we should be doing this in a piecemeal way, which is what's happening here, or for buying time until we really figure out what we're really going to do in terms of the management of the cinema and our arts and culture program as well. Or so this one with having an agreement with Country Arts SA is just a stopgap measure, or whether we postpone this decision so that we really have in front of us some, final report from, which I think is due before the end of June, from the Arts and Culture Strategy, which is one of those arrangements which is coming up, and later on, I believe we have the position for the Victor Sitter next item as well, Victor's cinema management. And to me, they're sort of ships in the night and they're just passing each other, and we haven't put that into a coherent framework.
Thank you, Councillor Robertson. Are there any further comments, questions? Councillor Kemp.
As it stands at the moment, with so much happening in the space around arts and culture and the developments, different modelling that we're looking at in the way of different things. I guess currently at the moment, we have a staff member who's looking after the arts and culture in Coral Street, whatever exhibitions go in there. I'm just wondering again, we should actually look at an expression of interest at looking at to see what is out there in the marketplace, to looking at the whole concept process over the next 2 or 3 years, 4 years, to see whether there is a company out there that could actually undertake the arts and culture process, the cinema management, and also just an expression of interest to see what's out there, test the marketplace before we commit to a 2-year job prospect, which most people will go continuation. Looking at the costings of it, to me, if I got this correctly, and I'll stand corrected if I'm wrong, but it's going to cost council an extra 70,000 a year, even with grant funding. Not quite sure we've looked at, because it's got here 280,000 less grant funding, 140, so council commitment 140,000 over 2 years, so it's $70,000 a year cost to council, which we never had before. So even with a grant, it's going to cost us a lot of money. So I won't be supporting this at the moment. I think we just stay as we are until we do a better process of looking at expressions of interest and looking at other models and seeing what the best option is and how we should move forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Kemp. Mark, sorry, Mark, mental blank. Would you like to add anything to that?
Sure. So to Councillor Kemp's point, we provided 3 options in terms of the cinema and also this position. The complexities when we came to council in April, the funding from Country Arts wasn't on the table. As it's presented, if we were to proceed as recommended in this report, it would save $44,000 on the current operating budget as it's drafted. If the council were to choose to move in the option of incorporating the role with the cinema management, that'd be an ongoing saving of $22,000 against the current operating budget. So there will be savings either way, based on what option council chooses. I guess the beauty of as it's recommended is it gives a full-time officer some clear space to assist with developing the arts and cultural programs that will support a future centre. At the minute, the short-term arrangement, Louise Hampel and our team is delivering a lot of the work around the Arts and Culture Centre, but she's pulling out all stops to do that work, and we are under resourced at the minute. So, yes, thank you.
Thank you, Mark. Are there any further questions or commentary in relation to that? Braden?
Thank you, Mayor Jenkins. Yeah, no, I'm fully in support of this recommendation. I think that the work that council are currently doing to keep our arts program going is exceptional, and we're very fortunate to have those staff. But I think also, like our previous arts and culture officer did an extraordinary job, and we were very incredibly fortunate to have her in the capacity that she was able to deliver, and where she was able to take us from the beginning to where we're now at in such a short period of time, I think is excellent. So I'm looking forward to having another person in that role and continuing Victor Harbour on this journey of our arts and culture. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Mann. Councillor Glasbrook?
I just had a question in relation to how this position would relate to a partnership with Country Arts SA. I would have thought that there'd be a separate issue. Country Arts SA, I know they're funding this, but in relation to operating the cinema, as in the next agenda item, I know, but it's sort of intertwined. Is this position at all interlinked with that, or?
Through the Mayor, no, it's not. So the intention here would be that it's subject to, Country Arts have not committed in any way to the funding of this role. The CEO and I had an interview today with them in relation to our application. We're unlikely to find out until mid-June as to whether we're successful with this application. The component of this role is suggested that the officer, if recruited in this position, would assist with programming in the cinema, not cinema, but artistic programming. But the proposal here is they're two separate arrangements. When we looked at it back in middle of April, the most financially prudent direction was to consolidate the cinema management and this position into one. But with the funding that's potentially on the table, the most financially prudent way is to receive potentially grant funding for a position in its entirety and continue with Country Arts as the manager of the cinema on our council's behalf.
Thank you, Mark. If there's no further commentary or questions, Councillor Henderson, would you like to close the debate? No. In that case, I put the recommendations to the floor. All those in favour? And those against? That's carried. Thank you. We now move to 10.3, which is actually the Victor Cinema Management. And again, I'll do that recommendation en bloc as the first one is receiving and noting the report only. Would somebody like to move both the recommendations 1 and 2 en bloc? Thank you, Councillor Henderson. And seconded Councillor Littley. Do either of you want to speak to that? Does anybody want to speak to it or have any questions? Councillor Robertson?
Yes, Mayor. I think it's well worth our while to, in relation to the Victor Cinema in particular, to see what else is out there. I mean, Country Arts SA, particularly, I think her name is Susan Baldwin, I think. But anyway, she's the person responsible within Country Arts SA for cinema and arts centre management. And she does a great job, but she's stretched right out. But you know, for us to go in for a further 2-year period and go to Country Arts SA, I mean, if you guarantee that Susan would be the person that would be down here, she's a great operator, but we don't know what else is available out there in South Australia. And we're supposed to be the state that pound for pound has got the best directors and operational people for all sorts of stuff in relation to the performing arts. So to me, it's I can understand last year we needed to get things taken over quickly in October. And so we reached out to Country Arts SA. But I think as we go on in this process, we need to let it be known that we out there, for people who don't know, that we are proposing to spend a lot of money on a very serious arts and culture centre, but we also need to go out and see what's available in the state, but also in the nation. And this is going to this is just you know, to be going out to one only operator, albeit that they've done a good job so far on the Victor Cinema. But I think our plans for Victor Cinema are broader than just running the cinema component of it. It's supposed to be our main stage, proscenium stage, sort of display centre, if you like. And we ought to be going out to seeing what's available. So, you know, and especially for a 2-year period. I mean, if we said, well, okay, it's going to be for 1 year period, well, we can just keep the wheels moving. But going out there for a 2-year period and going out only to Country Arts SA, to me is we could do better than that, I think. And then if nothing comes of the expression of interest, we don't find anyone that's as good or better, then fine. We have, you know, a good backup.
Thank you, Councillor Robertson. Any further commentary or questions? Councillor Kemp.
Thank you, Mayor Jenkins. I'm not supporting this in its current form at the moment. I think we have 4 months until the end of the MOU is finished, and I think in that 4-month period we can do an expression of interest. The only reason why I'm going down that pathway for is to look at and gather more information as to make a better informed decision on the future of how we manage this whole arts and culture precinct as to when it gets built. Matt McGann, I believe, did a business case when we looked at purchasing the cinema. And in that business case, there was statements in there about incomes and expenses, and it looked very good. I assume a Form 2 was used. I think that's how you sell off businesses, to look at those statements, and it showed a very good income stream, excess of expenses, which has been put in this agenda tonight which was a previous motion last year, around about August, I think, when we firstly looked at the management of the cinema by SA Arts. But it talked about an income of 300,000 with an expenditure of 300,000. But over the page, on page 105, we talked about now we have a returns of 170,000 to 180,000 per annum of profit and loss statements. So if the staff member's gone through and looked at the the profit and loss statements for the previous owners of the business and come up with this figure. So what figure was given to us originally to purchase the cinema? Is that correct? Is these figures correct? Who is correct? And is the information correct for us to move forward on this? Because to me, it seems like, well, we bought something on a certain level of income and profitable margin, excluding labour, we understand that, but now we've got figures in here which are totally different, which gives a different point of view on exactly what the cinema can make. About what was presented to the chamber for voting and decision making. So I do have concerns about the information in this area, this agenda item. I do wonder, you know, how valid it is, since we've got 2 different issues on finances. So I think that's why at the moment, while we've still got time up our sleeve to run an expression of interest to get an idea what's in the marketplace, to look at a third party outsourcing to say, is this viable, not viable, and how would it work? And to give us a better base to work from, a better foundation of information, so we can actually say, yes, let's stay with SA Arts, let's do this, let's do that. But until we get that information, we're just running on the current information we got, which is limited to what's really available in South Australia or nationally to look at how we go manage this whole cinema in the future. So I think we start now gathering that knowledge. I think we'd be a better place to look at actually making better decisions in the future. And it may sit with a council managed model, it could be an outsourced model, it could be any different type of model, depending what we come up with. But at the moment, I think we still have time to not commit ourselves to get some further clarification and information. Thank you.
Perhaps, Mark, you might be able to respond to some of Councillor Kemp's queries, in particular whether or not the correct figures are in the report.
Sure. Through the Mayor, happy to provide members with a split of the operating scenario for the business. Gone through this quite closely, looking at the financial statements provided by the proprietors prior to the sale. And we've run a series of models looking at the business, what it operates under, its costs, operating costs. So at this point in time, under normal conditions, it's very difficult to predict gross income for the facility going forward, given that we're in a COVID environment. But certainly in a normal series of events, the business will turn over about $1 million a year, leading to a profit of about $160,000, $170,000. So that is based on some pretty sound projections, based on what's provided in the profit and loss statements provided by the owners of the business on the sale, on historical figures achieved. Through your investigation, sorry, Nadine, may I ask a question?
Certainly.
Through your investigations in those figures, did you actually look at that figure that we were sold on as to why we bought it, because of the actual money that it made, of that amount of figure of 300,000, according to the previous motion that was passed? So I'm just wondering, did that come into account? How did it come into account? And how much validity was that amount, true or false? Or was this, because that's leading to, was council misled in the figures given to us? So did you look at all the purchasing documentation, look at the Form 2, which I believe is provided to look at the profit and loss statements? But you're saying now that they're not correct. Is that what you're saying? So the numbers that we've compiled here are based on the actuals provided by the business owner. I'm not sure on what basis Ms. McGann provided her numbers on, but certainly the numbers we've provided here are based on some actuals. And we've plotted those based on some likely scenarios, and looked at historical income trends as well. And so, whilst it's difficult in this environment to give an absolute, the projections, I'm quite comfortable with what's provided in this documentation, which I'm happy to provide to members.
Yeah. I might just ask Director Pathouse to expand on that.
Yeah, through the Mayor, I think, Councillor Kemp, if I understand you correctly, you're struggling to reconcile the figure now compared to the figure at the time of purchase that was provided by the previous owners as part of the contract documents, but also the figure that was put in place last year for the first or for the remainder of the current financial year. And those figures were based on a breakdown of the business and the various financial structures and modelling that was provided by the business, the actuals, as part of the contract, looking at it and trying to project it from a number of different perspectives. One of those was in a COVID environment where there was some uncertainty around when things would come back online, bearing in mind that we went into the contract for the cinema, that was pre-COVID, so that sort of lumbered up during the course of the contract and the settlement. So there were some projections done around what the costs for running the cinema would be, what the income might be in the COVID environment, and all the things that went with it, and in the context of a council-run cinema, differences in insurances and the way some of those things work. So they were purely just projections. The work Mark's now been able to do is based on, and I must say that when I did those projections, the projection for income was $200,000, when council made the decision, and a $300,000 expenses. When council made the decision, it increased the income to $300,000 just to balance it, which wasn't quite the way I'd have calculated it, but that's council's prerogative, I guess. So that's how those figures came about. Mark's now had the benefit of seeing how it's operated through the partnership with Country Arts SA. We just understand it a lot better now, so the projections change a little bit when you get the opportunity to understand the business a bit better.
Just a clarification question, if you don't mind, please, to finish off. Could you then explain to me, Mr. Padhouse, then the process that Matt McGann went through when she spoke to the business owner, got all the financial figures and came up with that figure on the figure that we purchased on, which is not these figures, which is now, this is pre-COVID, I understand that. It was not about projections about the future income, it's about what they were making. And that's on the process that while we made a decision. So that's what I'm asking. Could you explain those figures that Matt McGann put in her business case after she did her financials?
Through the Mayor, bearing in mind that business case was at least 3 years ago, 2 years ago, I'm not sure how she's come up with those figures. I'd have to go back to that business case and look through it again and ask Maz.
Are there any further questions, Councillor Schofield?
I haven't got a question, but what I'd like to just say is that, you know, when we purchase any business, yes, we do look at the figures, but we need to be mindful that there are many unknowns that will affect any business, and it won't matter how well you manage it. Customer trends will change, and there are the times when you really need to look at your risk management and perhaps change the focus of your business in relation to the trends of your customers. So I think given the fact that we looked at this a couple of years ago, the figures that we were given, I believe were the correct figures. We've had quite a few things happen, in particular COVID, and also the fact that the customer trend has changed a little bit in the cinemas. We're only just coming back to the capacities that businesses would like, and not all of them have that privilege to have the capacity that the cinema has at the moment. So we need, as elected members, take into account, try to put our business hats on when we're looking at some of these things.
Thank you, Councillor Schofield. Is there any further commentary? Councillor Glasbrook?
Yeah, just for the record, and to get back to the recommendation here.
Thank you.
I tend to agree that I believe that we should at least seek some advice on what we could be looking at if we got another provider to come and operate the cinema for a couple of years. I just think it would help us make an accurate decision, even if we didn't go out for a fully fledged expression of interest. If we could somehow make some inquiries, you know, what the going rate is, sort of thing, I would feel a lot more comfortable. I would certainly, if this was my business, I would certainly do that. So that's my opinion. That'll do.
Thank you, Councillor Charles.
I'd like to hear some commentary from our CEO, who's obviously not busting to speak, but being on the, are you still the chair of the Country Arts South Australia? And if you are, can you throw us a little bit of information, how you feel about this?
Through the Mayor, I'm not a chair of Country Arts, I'm on the board. Well, obviously, we've provided you with 3 options, and council is well entitled to go with either of those options. We have felt that probably the best option at this current time is the Country Arts Agreement, but by no means does that restrict the council from going out to the EOI. It doesn't take any great effort to actually seek what the market has to offer, and we bring that back further information for the chamber. We obviously, from an administrative point of view, some commercial contracts will be looking for longer than 2 years to have a return on their investment, because obviously any private sector operator would be looking for an income. Council was also looking to activate that space with other arts programs and not just cinema activity. We wanted some community activity and other community performances and use of that facility. This would enable us to do that. But again, our current contract doesn't expire until September. and we are more than capable of going out and getting some further information for the chamber if that's what you wish.
Is there any further commentary or questions?
Just
got a
if this
question?
motion gets up or not get up, I'll be putting another motion afterwards. Mayor, just letting you know.
Thank you. Councillor Henderson, do you want to close the debate?
Yes, thank you, Mayor. As far as I see it, Country Arts SA are managing Victor Cinema extremely well, and so well, in fact, that they moved in and the changeover was seamless, to the extent that most of the members of the public, our community, wouldn't even have noticed any difference in who has been running the cinema. It has been so seamless a changeover. There is no reason that I can see why we wouldn't offer them another 2-year contract, because they are doing it extremely well. And especially given that in 2 years' time, we may be, well, we expect, if the Arts and Culture Centre development proceeds, that we will be looking possibly at a different management plan in the future. But in the meantime, I see absolutely no reason why we can't offer them a further 2-year contract.
Thank you, Councillor Henderson. I'll put the motion to the recommendation to the floor. All those in favour? And those against? That's carried. Thank you. We now move to item, actually what we might do, it's, this one should be a fairly quick one. After this one, we'll have a break. This is the Victor Harbour Road duplication project.
Just, Mayor Jenkins, I did indicate I would like to put another motion on this matter. And you nodded your head, so
I beg your
am
pardon, I
able to?
thought you meant if that recommendation
Well, if it
failed.
passed, I still would be put one up.
Yeah, you can, if you'd like to put one up.
Thank you. This is a very simple motion. Is that the City of Victor Harbour undertake an expression of interest for the management of the cinema within the next 2 months. Just all right.
That goes against the recommendation that you just agreed. The chamber just agreed to go out to Country Arts SA for the next 2 years.
Yes, I understand it, but we still could also do an expression of interest to find out the marketplace to what's happening out there. That's all, just to go out there and gather more information. Because it may, I mean, time we undertake this process, analyse it, look at what's happening. We might be in a better position to have this information now instead of waiting, about 6 months out before we go start managing a whole process and looking at different, other avenues of whether we continue with this model or another model. So I'm just trying to gather further information as soon as possible to have a better understanding.
I might just ask the CEO to respond to that. Councillor Kemp.
Through the Mayor, if I may, to undertake what I think you're looking for, rather than doing an EOI, which could confuse the matter if we're going into a current contract, which has just been endorsed, I would be, under the instruction of a recommendation, happy to undertake some soft market testing directly with potential other providers and bring that information back to the chamber. So it's not a broad expression of interest process, it's some soft market testing, so I can do that directly with other operators. If that's what you're looking, because you're looking for information as to what possibly could be presented.
Yep, if I just change that to the City of Victor and take a soft marketing to source information from other providers.
What would the cost of that be?
Just my time.
Just your time. Are you seconding that, Councillor Robertson? Just wait for Karina to finish writing that.
To source information from other providers.
Councillor Kemp, can I just ask you a question while we're waiting for that? Do you think if this takes, say, 3 to 6 months to look at what other cinema operators want, do you think that there would be a private business operator that would want to do this for 18 months?
I think we've got to think a little bit bigger, change our paradigm shift. This is not about a short-term process. This could be leading into a long-term process that once the arts and culture centre is built, you know, a third party may be interested in taking on just not 18 months, maybe 5 or 10 years worth of managing the cinema.
But we're not just managing a cinema, we're managing...
Well, you could manage the whole complex. I think this is really about gathering information. This is the best way of doing it. Do it now while we've got the opportunity to check it, to test it, change the modelling, look at what's going to happen. At least we have a better idea when we move forward, when we're looking at planning, decision making on building this complex, as to some of the modelling out there which we could be a better fay with and be happier with. We won't know until we actually start gathering that information. Sometimes it's good just to get it out there and people know that this is maybe an opportunity to come up in 3 or 4 years' time or 2 years' time, whenever we build it. They're maybe better prepared than because we've already put out a soft market approach.
Okay, Councillor Robertson, you seconded that. Do you want to speak to it?
Yes, I do, Mayor. I mean, I think we have procurement rules. You know, we should be going out and wherever we can, looking for competitive bids on stuff that we have. I find it fantastic that we would be, notwithstanding the work done by Country Arts SA over the last year or so, or less than a year, I think, on the management of the Victor Cinema. You know, we're out to create something really special here and if we think that, you know, that Country Arts SA is a government body, you know, it funds and it has skill sets and has people like Susan Baldwin in there, really smart people as well. But it's not the be all and end all of arts and culture centre management, cinema management at all. It has various skills in this area and we're putting all our eggs in the one basket and we haven't been out putting our business hats on, you know, going out and seeing what else is out there in this country. I know personally of some other, you know, arts and culture centres in other states in this country that have an entirely different approach to what they're doing than what we are. And basically the difference in the approach is that they go out far and wide, sometimes internationally, to see what other practices are being put in place. And to me, it's not going to take, you mentioned 3 to 6 months. Well, no, you can find this stuff out in 3 to 6 weeks, probably 3 weeks, a targeted program. So here we are sitting in the state that's arguably at the pointy end of the performing arts sphere in this country. And we're not asking the people that put on the shows here, you know, how can we make the Victor Cinema? We don't want to just run, you know, HBO, you know, box office Hollywood movies there. We're hopefully going to develop it into a location that's going to be showing all sorts of specialist movies. That's what's so exciting about the splitting up of the upstairs cinema into 3, maybe 4 smaller cinemas to take account of trends of people that want to watch other things. And we know from, you know, if those of you who were present at the South Coast Environment Centre presentation on backyard promotion of and soil health, that, you know, big audiences will come to these things. So, and then, you know, there's the whole issue of development of the cinema into a place that attracts conferences, not exhibitions, conferences and other sorts of events like that. And, you know, here we are for 2 years. We're going to go out to do, you know, business as usual. And to me,
focus on the recommendation, Councillor Robertson?
Pardon?
Can you focus on the recommendation? You're speaking to the
Yeah,
recommendation.
we go out and find out what else is there.
Yeah.
And that's not going to take me 3 to 6 months.
Thank you.
It's like 3 weeks if it really does it properly. It's
Does,
not a huge area, but it's enough to examine.
thank you. Does anybody else have any questions or comments? Councillor Littley?
Yeah, I won't be supporting this because as a council, we previously, the previous motion we supported was to not go down this path of an EOI. I don't disagree with the concept of going out for EOIs, but as a council, in the previous motion, we had on the table we could go for an EOI or we could go with Country Arts SA, and the council voted to go with Country Arts SA. So I can't support this, it's superfluous. It didn't get up last time. That option was in front of us. Again, good points made by both Councillor Kemp and Councillor Robertson that there are other things out there. As a council, we'd already made a decision last motion.
Councillor Henderson?
Yes, I agree. I think this would be a waste of administration's time to follow this process. As I said earlier, in 2 years' time, 3 years' time, we'll be looking at a completely different picture. We'll hopefully be developing our Arts and Culture Centre. We are now presently developing our Arts and Culture strategy. Along with that, towards the development of the centre, I presume that no doubt we will be developing a business plan along with that, and future management will fit into all of that at some future date. But this would be jumping the gun. It's not necessary now. It's for future discussions.
Thank you, Councillor Henderson. Any further comments? Councillor Glasbrook?
Yeah, well, just for the record, for Councillor Kemp, this is exactly what I was talking about in the previous motion, that this is what we should have done. But unfortunately, as has been made aware, the council has decided not to do that. So unfortunately, I believe as hard as it is to swallow, we have to do what the majority wants at times. So I won't be supporting it either.
Councillor Kemp, would you like to close the debate?
Thank you, Mayor Jenkins. Again, this is only information gathering and we're talking about developing our strategies and our plans, and this is part of the process. If you go think strategically, you've got to start gathering information and understanding what's around in order to develop your strategies and your plans. So I suppose it's a soft marketing approach, not an EOI, which was originally presented. So I guess we need to get our facts straight when we talk. The other one is that the only option we had recommendation here was option 2, which is the Country Arts SA. We weren't really discussing the other options of direct management by council or anything like that. It's just a commentary in the document here to look at the history. Again, there's still opportunities to look at this process, but since the motion's been passed and all that, I still believe it's a part of a process of gathering of information and knowledge, and you can never start too early in some of these areas. Because you're better, if you're better knowledge, you have more knowledge, you're better prepared, you're better planned, and you can make better decisions instead of rushing it towards the end. But that's my position, that I think it's an opportunity that we should not miss.
Thank you, Councillor Kemp. I'll now put the motion to the floor. All those in favour? And those against? That motion is lost. Thank you. All those in favour, could you please stand? I'll just wait for Karina to get it up on the board. For Councillor Robertson, Councillor Charles and Councillor Kemp. And against, Councillor Mann, Councillor Hales, Councillor Littley, Councillor Glasbrook, Councillor Henderson and Councillor Schofield. Motion is lost. It's 8:10, so I think we're due for a break for 10 minutes. So if we can come back at 8:25, give us a chance to have a wriggle around and stretch. Thank you very much. I'll see you then. Ready with the live streaming, Michelle? Yep. Yep. Sorry, it's on. Beautiful. Thank you. We now are up to 12.1, which is the Victor Harbour Road Duplication Project Stakeholder Engagement. There's two recommendations there, which I'll do in block, as the first one is receiving and noting the report. The second one is delegating the Chief Executive Officer to provide feedback to the Department of Infrastructure and Transport on behalf of Council in support of scenario 2 with the extended duplication of the Victor Harbour Road. Would someone like to move that way, please? Thank you, Councillor Henderson. And seconded by Councillor Hales. Thank you very much. Would either of you like to speak to that? Councillor Hales? No. Does anybody want to speak to it or any questions? Councillor Charles.
I assume Alexandrina would be voting on this too. They'd be keen to see the same result, would they?
Through the mayor, I can't speak on behalf of them. I would assume so, yes, and happy to check their agendas accordingly.
It'd be good if their meeting is coming up after ours to perhaps see if they can add some weight to it. It's only a small amount, small gain, but we want, and I understand the Aldinga section there is very, very important. There's been a lot of complaints over that. Labor is saying, well, we would have done it by now. Liberals saying, well, we are doing it, and everybody wants to get to Maslin's, I know, but we'd like to have them come down here to our new international hotel, hopefully.
Any further commentary or questions? If not, I'll put the recommendation to the floor. All those in favour? Those against? That's carried. Thank you. 12.2 is Alexandra Council Joint Cemetery Development Proposal Update. Again, there are two recommendations, with the first being receiving and noting the reports. To move them on block, Councillor Charles. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Kemp. Either of you like to speak to this? Councillor Charles?
Just to say it's unfortunate that they didn't come on board with us. It would have saved us, but they're not desperate for cemetery space as we appear to be.
Thank you.
That's all that can be said.
Councillor Kemp?
Thank you, Mayor Jenkins. Again, it's just unfortunate, but that's the way things go sometimes. I'm just sort of, what's the timelines on our current cemetery at the moment? And I guess no doubt this will need to be put into our asset management plan, because maybe some type of expenditure somewhere along the line or development. Just a question mainly, just what timeframes do we have, or it gets too critical?
Yeah, through the mayor, I understand about 5 to 7 years.
Are there any other questions or any further commentary? Councillor Robertson?
Yes, Mayor. Do we know why the Alexandrina Council decided not to go into a joint venture?
Through the mayor, I understand that Alexandrina has quite a supply, so they're not looking to invest in further cemetery facilities for quite some time.
Yeah, but I mean, does that really preclude a joint venture on, like, I understand, like Councillor Charles said, we have a more urgent need for extra cemetery space before they do, but one would have thought that if you were working on a joint cemetery facility together, particularly if that involved, you know, some bells and whistles like cremation facilities and so on, that one council could move ahead and start to, a joint venture could be agreed upon without any money attached to it. One council could start to move ahead with that, but it just seems to be a pattern that we, you know, we had the community services decision by the Alexandrina Council not to continue on with it, with that joint operation, and That to me, I think is going to be costly to them, but this one was quite a shock. I thought it was really bit weird. Anyway.
Thank you, Councillor Robertson. Any further commentary or any other questions? Councillor Charles, do you want to close the debate? No.
Sorry, Mayor, can I ask another question? If we are not going to have an option with Alexandrina Council, I know we're a great deal further away from Yankalilla, but maybe it's a question for the CEO. What does it take for us to develop another area of a cemetery within the boundary of the council?
Through the Mayor, obviously initially it takes identifying a parcel of land which would accommodate and address all the criteria that we're looking for, which this council has done some investigations previously around that. And we are constantly talking with Yankalilla Council on where we can actually have some shared resources. And while Alexandrina have actually stated they don't want to do a shared facility, they are looking at their policies and procedures for their current cemeteries to enable those people who don't live or reside, or previously lived or resided, in their council area to actually be buried within their cemetery. So they're opening it up to the south coast. So there are opportunities there, but it's more around the joint ownership of a site they weren't interested in pursuing. But we will continue to do those investigations, which this council had been doing for some time prior to it moving the motion about that joint facility.
Councillor Charles, do you want to close the debate? No, all good. I'll put those recommendations on block to the floor. All those in favour? Those against? That's carried. Thank you. 12.3 speed limit review, Ocean Street Precinct. Proposed 30-kilometre speed zone environment. The first recommendation is receiving a note the speed limit review. And the second recommendation is that Council delegate the Chief Executive Officer to provide feedback to the Department for Infrastructure and Transport to support the final authorisation and implementation of a 30-kilometre-hour speed limit for the nominated town centre area. I'll do those recommendations on block. Councillor Kemp, you moving that way? And Councillor Charles seconding that. Do you want to speak to it, Councillor Kemp?
Thank you, Mayor Jenkins. This is something that has to occur as we get busier and busier with open space, with our upgrades of our precinct, be more people walking around. We need to have limited cars or movement of vehicles, or especially at lower speeds around our town centre. If the Anchorage development gets up and a big car park is built, then all that traffic plan, and we need to slow down the speed of the vehicles. The only question I have is in recommendation 2. It's got Torrens Street written in there. Is that saying we go put 30k speed limit on Torrens Street? I know the roads that come off Torrens Street are go at 30k's, but not Torrens Street itself. And that would, to me, cause the congestion of traffic by slowing it down too much with traffic lights, roundabouts. I'm just wondering that I would, depending on the answer, because I would bury the motion by deleting Torrens Street out of this recommendation.
Thank you. Through the Mayor, you're correct, Councillor Kemp. Torrens Street is only the start of some of it's not actually along Torrens Street itself.
So I will bury the motion by deleting Torrens Street out of that recommendation.
Are you happy for that, Councillor Charles?
Yes, I am. I didn't notice, so I'm glad you picked that up. Thank you very much.
Any further discussion? Councillor Charles, did you want to speak to it?
I don't think so. No.
Any further discussion? Councillor Robertson?
Yes, Mayor. This one reminded me of a conversation I had with a resident of Railway Terrace recently, who was complaining that that cars were moving far too fast, notwithstanding the notwithstanding the speed bump that's in the middle near McLaren Lane, that cars were moving far too quickly down Railway Terrace. And that needed to have a speed limit on it, which I guess would be probably, well, yeah, maximum of 30 kilometres an hour. What is the proposed speed limit for Railway Terrace?
30. It's written in recommendation
It-
2.
Part of this same recommendation about reducing them all to 30 includes Railway Terrace.
So, sorry, but what is it now?
I believe it's 40.
40, is it? Well, that gentleman would be pleased with this, yeah.
Any further discussion or questions? Councillor Kemp, do you want to close the debate? If not, I'll put the recommendation on block to the floor. All those in favour? Those against? That's carried, thank you. Junior Scooter Park, community consultation. Again, I'll do the recommendation on block. First recommendation is council receiving and noting the report. And the second one is council endorsing the preparation of designs for upgraded junior scooter facilities at the Victor Harbour Oval. Would you like to move that, Councillor Kemp? And seconded by Councillor Charles. Councillor Kemp, do you want to speak to that?
Thank you, Mayor Jenkins. I think it's been a great response from the community and the children through the R7 school to have a look at this. The location is ideal to expand upon the BMX track with the junior scooter park facilities. I'm just, one of my questions in the design process, because it's next to the river, Inman, are there going to be, the bank area is going to be cleaned up, tidied up, park benches, lawns, that type, make a real good picnic area, and maybe a fence put along the bank, along the river bank, to ensure that young kids don't go off these scooters. So just I wonder if the design process and the thoughts around this location.
Thank you. Through the Mayor. Yes, Councillor Kemp, we can look at that as part of the design process.
Thank you. Yeah, look, I think it will be a great facility to give our younger junior scooter people who now ride on the footpaths will have a safe area, an educational area to do it for a very minimal cost. And I think it will be a fantastic location at the Victor Harbour Oval. That would activate the Victor Harbour Oval as well in areas where people can go and have picnics around the Oval and that type of thing without any other sports there. But even if the sports are there, at least children can go and occupy themselves while sports are being played on the Oval. I think it's a great idea. I think it's a good concept, and I think it support this, and I think it'll be a great success. Thank you.
Can I just ask the CEO, the designs, or perhaps Kathy might be able to answer me, the design for the scooter facilities, is that that costed in this year's budget, or is that going to be in next year's budget?
Through the Chair, I believe that's in next year's budget.
In next year's budget, yep. So they haven't been endorsed as yet? No.
Through the Chair, I believe that's whipped from this year.
Sorry?
Through the Mayor, I can probably answer that. There is a component that is in the still kept in the March budget review to commence the design, but the majority of the funds have been put into WIP as a work in progress into 21-22.
And can you remember how much it cost, the design?
There's $10,000 allowed, so I can't remember the exact amount that has been included next year, but I think it was around $8,000 or $8,500.
Thank you. There any further commentary, Councillor Robertson?
Yes, Mayor. I enjoyed reading the feedback from the primary school children and the other ones. Who designed the feedback forms? Was that Michelle?
Yep. Yes, Michelle.
It was. Well done. Yeah, I thought it was really innovative. I mean, it really brought out the responses from at least those kids. You could see the huge amount of effort that some of them went to express, what it was just really job well done. Thank you.
Thank you, councillor Robertson. Any further questions or commentary? Councillor Kemp, do you want to close? Councillor Charles?
I missed my opportunity seconding it. You went straight on to councillor Robertson. No, that's all right. I could have spoken up, but the only thing I'd be interested in knowing whether there's some scheme or some other method that other councils are using to try and keep litter, particularly plastic and other items, out of their rivers and storm drains. Putting it in that location, there's already a great deal of litter that blows across the oval and into the Inland River. Same thing around the primary school into the other one. So whilst you're considering fencing or whatever other safety arrangements, perhaps there's something that could be strung across that would capture that sort of stuff.
I'll ask Kathy Hayter to make a note of that for the design
Thank
team. If there's no further commentary, councillor Kemp, do you want to close the debate?
I just want to say that I think the feedback through the public consultation says it better than I could finish off. Thank you.
You will put that recommendation to the floor. All those in favour? Those against? Carried, thank you. 12.5, undergrounding of existing power lines. The recommendation is that council receive and note the report. And the second recommendation is that council resolve only to consider the undergrounding of power lines where the proposed works meet the Power Line Environment Committee scheme eligibility criteria as follows on there. Would someone like to move those recommendations en bloc? Thank you, councillor Schofield. And seconding that, councillor Kemp. Councillor Schofield, do you want to speak to the recommendation? Councillor Kemp.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor Jenkins. I think this is a good outcome for this issue. There are streets that will require this type of program and this type of analysis to be undertaken if we want to beautify our landscape, our coastlines and various places like that. This gives us an opportunity on a case-by-case basis, and depending on that, we then can make a good decision. And of course, PLEC does provide 2/3 funding for any of this type of work, so it's not full cost to council. But I think it's a good opportunity to beautify our coastal areas and certain areas that they look at, symbolic values and etc. Thank you.
Thank you. I now put the recommendations to the floor. All those in favour? No. No, councillor Kemp has closed the debate. No. Did you just second them? Oh, I beg your pardon. I beg your pardon, councillor Robertson. I'll ask the CEO for comment. Councillor Robertson.
Through the Mayor, if I may, what you're resolving doesn't exclude that from actually occurring. What we're saying, this gives the administration some direction when we do get inquiries, when there isn't that partnership approach, that we can say, well, this is council's position. It doesn't stop any resident or group of residents doing a deputation to council, presenting to council, and council give consideration on a case-by-case basis. But in the majority where we as administration have got a number of queries of late, I think council needs to have a position, and this criteria is probably the best process to do that. But it doesn't exclude that type of approach.
Yeah, if I might just come back again on that issue. A person reading this policy would maybe take it that, of course, if you're just talking about if there's council contribution to the undergrounding of power lines, then that matters. But here it doesn't leave any room. People that want to underground it at their own cost. So it's not a matter of the money. It's a matter of does the council want power lines undergrounded or not? It's a decision tree thing rather than a money thing. And we haven't made it clear in there that, okay, if you want to, in your street, you want to underground the power lines and you'll get together and say, yeah, we'll pay for it, then council would support that surely. But we're not putting that down here. We're only saying these are the criteria where
Yep, so I've just been told that Karen wants to speak.
Sorry. Through the Mayor, I was only going to make a suggestion for wording if that was to be considered, that council resolved to only consider funding the undergrounding of power lines where they meet the PLEC eligibility criteria. So it's not precluding people from approaching us where they're not seeking funding from council.
Would that be something that the mover and seconder would be happy with?
I'm sure Councillor Robertson could do a third recommendation on something along those lines of taking into account unsolicited bid policy to look at community financing undergrounding of power lines. This is there so I think you're trying to get the message out to the communities they wanted to come involved into it, they can. But yes, I can do a third recommendation.
Okay. We can wait until we'll deal with these two recommendations first then, if you don't want to vary it. Did you, Councillor Robertson, want to, if the mover and the seconder don't want it varied, do you want to put in an amendment in relation to only consider the funding of power lines? You'd rather do it a third motion than an amendment? Yep. Sure. Sure. So you don't want to put an amendment, no one else wants to put an amendment in relation to that? Councillor Hales?
I will move the amendment to put the word funding in there for all the reasons that Councillor Robertson has outlined. I think why deal with it in two different motions and have any lack of clarity by the two motions going up against each other when you can include it in the one. So I'm happy to move an amendment to the motion to insert that word.
Okay, do I have a second for the amendment? Councillor Henderson? Do either of you want to speak to the amendment? Does anyone want to speak to the amendment? I'll put the amendment up for a vote then. All those in favour of the amendment? 2, 3, 4, 6, 7. Those against? That's carried. Thank you. So we go back to the motion, the amended motion. The council resolve only to consider funding the underground power lines where the proposed works meet the power line Environmental Committee scheme eligibility as follows. Do I have anybody else that wants to speak to the motion? Councillor Schofield, you moved it. Do you want to close debate? Okay, Schofield moved it. Councillor Kemp seconded it. You don't want to say anything? All right, then I'll put it to the floor. All those in favour? Those against? That's carried. Thank you. Councillor Kemp, you foreshadowed a third motion.
No, I just had made a suggestion for Councillor Robertson to help him out. That's all.
Okay. All right, we move on to 12.6. The adjacent owner notification retail fuel outlet, Adelaide Road. Now, is this still valid? We just need to receive and note it. Recommendation 2 is not required because of item 9.5. So would someone like to move that we receive and note the report? Thank you, Councillor Henderson. Seconded by Councillor Schofield. Either of you want to speak to it? Councillor Charles?
Sorry, I guess I just got a question. It seems as though the two service stations that we're talking about are both mobile X's. It's very confusing. I thought maybe one had changed their mind about where they were going to be. So they're both going to have a hamburger attachment or restaurant. It's going to be very interesting, isn't it? Okay, so there really is two. Thank you.
Any further comment? All those in favour? Those against? That's carried. Thank you. 12.7 is the recreation and sports grants in club and individual grants. I'll do those 3 recommendations en bloc. If someone would like to move them en bloc, Councillor Schofield, and seconded. Do either of you want to speak to them? No. Does anybody want to speak to them or have any questions? Not, I'll put it to the floor. All those in favour? Those against? That's carried. Thank you. We now go to minutes of council meetings, and the first one is the Southern Communities Transport Scheme Advisory Committee. Minutes of the 21st of April. Would someone like to move that report? Thank you very much, Councillor Henderson, and seconded by, thank you, Councillor Hales. Either of you want to speak to that? Anybody want to speak to it? All those in favour? Those against? That's carried. Thank you. 13.2 is the Audit Committee minutes of the 3rd of May, and the recommendation is that Council receive and note them. Would someone like to move that way? Councillor Glasbrook, thank you. And do I have a seconder? Thank you, Councillor Robertson. Do either of you want to speak to them? Anybody want to speak to them? All those in favour? That's carried. Thank you very much. 13.3 is the Performance Review Committee minutes of the 5th of May. Would somebody like to move that way? Thank you, Councillor Henderson, and seconded by Councillor Glasbrook. Do either of you want to speak to them? Does anybody want to speak to them? If not, do you want to speak to it, Councillor Charles? Oh, sorry, all those in favour? Those against? Carried, thank you very much. Subsidiaries and representative reports, and the recommendation is that Council receive and note the representative reports for May. Somebody moving that way? Thank you, Councillor Henderson, and seconding Councillor Mann, was that you? Thanks. No, it's Councillor Littley. Do either of you want to speak to that? Anybody want to speak to it? All those in favour? That's carried. Thank you very much.
Hmm.
14.2 is the Fleurieu Regional Aquatic Centre Authority Independent Member reappointment. I'll do those two recommendations on block. The first one is receiving and noting the report about the independent member reappointment. And the second one is that council endorsing the reappointment of Mr. Mark Easton as independent board member. Would someone like to move that way? Thank you, Councillor Kemp. And seconded by Councillor Charles. Either of you want to speak to that? Councillor Kemp.
Just to give you a bit of an idea of Mark Easton's background, he's the CEO of Bowland, which looks after all the bowling clubs throughout South Australia. Huge organisation, huge issues around dealing with staff, all processes. But he is very good, he's very articulated, he's very level-headed in the way he approaches the issues around the aquatic centre and how we move forward. So, yes, I do support his reappointment.
Thank you, Councillor Kemp. Councillor Charles, do you want to speak to the motion?
No, all that's been said is correct about this gentleman. Quite often you see glowing reports about people on boards, and then when you actually see what they do, you think, well, hang on, what's that report all about? But this chap does deserve all that's been said about him. Thank you.
Does anybody else have any questions or comments? Put it to the floor then. All those in favour? Those against? That's carried. Thank you. 14.3 is the Victor Harbour Horse Tram Authority third budget review. And the recommendation one is that we receive and note the Horse Tram Authority budget review report. And recommendation two is that council endorse the March budget review as presented at attachment B to the report, noting that an unchanged contribution from council of $415,400. Someone like to move that way? Councillor Schofield, thank you. And seconded, thank you, Councillor Littley. Councillor Schofield, do you want to talk to the recommendations? No, Councillor Littley. Does anybody want to speak to the recommendations or have any questions? Councillor Kemp.
Thank you, Mayor Jenkins. More of a clarification around the report. The actual figures shown in the red sheet shows a deficit of 23,000 at the third budget review. So if you add that to the contributions by council, that's a 438,400 deficit in my addings up in my maths. So just a clarification if that's correct or not, because I think, the Horse Tram Authority, like the Aquatic Centre, must report their figures correctly, is exactly what is the deficit. And of course, we know that contribution by councils is taken off in that context, but at least it's reporting the full figures, because the way it reads, an unchanged contribution from council, in brackets, operating deficit of 415,400. But the figure showing on page 253 at that period is 23,000 deficit currently. Just whether that's correct or not, just the way I read the figures. So to me, it's 438,400. So the recommendation two is potentially, to me, is incorrect.
I'll just see if Director Rokaczynski can clarify. Oh, Kelly might be able to.
Thank you, through the Mayor. So in regards to attachment B, which is that breakdown, the review variance of the 23,000 is the adjustment between the budget review and the previous current budget. But in terms, in terms of the year-to-date actuals, so if we're looking at the third column of numbers, the year-to-date actuals are sitting at, I've got to count the columns because it's gone over the page, at a total expenses, this is weird. So we have a deficit of 30, it's a bit hard to read, I think it's 30,535. That's as in the year-to-date at this point in time. So there's still both income and expenses to hit those lines. And so it's just providing that point in time view of what the actual expenditure and income that has been received has come in. But the budget review is saying that they're expecting it to be exactly the same at the 30th of June as the current budget.
Thank you for that.
Any further commentary, councillor Robertson?
Yes, Mayor, on the budget, we have page 253, that corporate support is still significant there. Is this is in addition to the $415,000 in cash that we provide to this authority?
Karen?
Corporate support, the IT, finance, records and administration. Is that, it's still dependent on council for doing those functions?
Through the Mayor, it's not in addition to the 415,400. It is something that we are looking to review, but as the horse trams become more independent in terms of running some of its own administrative processes, there is still a reasonable contribution from the administration, but that's sometimes about being able to have efficiencies through sharing processes and systems to some extent as well. So we are expecting that in time that will reduce somewhat, but never to zero.
Thank you, Kelly.
If I might ask, do you think that in time means in a year, in 5 years, in 10 years, or do we have a target for that?
Through the Chair, it's probably at a point when we can go through a formal review process, which will take a little bit of time. I'm not thinking 5 years, I'm thinking within the next year or so.
Okay.
Is there any further questions or commentary? Councillor Schofield, do you want to close the debate? In that case, I'll put it to the recommendations block to the floor. All those in favour? And those against? Councillor Robertson, do you want to vote? Sorry, all those, sorry, could we do that again? All those in favour? And those against? That's carried, thank you. .5 is the Southern Hills Local Government Association Audit Committee. Oh, sorry, I've missed one. 14.4. Fleury Aquatic Centre draft budget. I will do the first two recommendations en bloc. The first recommendation is receiving and noting. The second recommendation is that council approve the Fleury Aquatic Centre Authority's draft budget as provided in attachment A. Someone like to move that way? Councillor Henderson. And seconded by Councillor Robertson. Do you want to speak to that, Councillor Henderson? Councillor Robertson? Does anybody want to speak to it? So we're moving, I'll put it on block to the floor. Recommendation 1 and 2. All those in favour? Those against? That's carried, thank you. And recommendation 3 and 4, I'll do together. Someone like to move recommendation 3 and 4, Councillor Henderson, and seconded by Councillor Robertson. Do either of you want to speak to them? No. Does anybody want to speak to either of those recommendations? If not, I'll put them to the floor. All those in favour? Those against? That's carried, thank you. 14.5, which is the Southern Hills LGA Audit Committee exemption. I'll do the recommendation 1 and 2 on block together. Would somebody like to move that way? Councillor Schofield, thank you. And seconded by Councillor Littley. Would either of you like to speak to that? Would anybody like to speak to it or have questions? If not, I'll put it to the floor. All those in favour? And those against? Carried, thank you. Mayoral report, recommendations, council receive and note. Someone like to move that way? Councillor Schofield, thank you. And seconding that, Councillor Henderson. Any questions? All those in favour? Against? Carried, thank you. The elected member reports. Someone like to move that way? Councillor Schofield, thank you. And seconded by, thank you, Councillor Mann. Any questions in relation to those reports? Put that to the floor then. All those in favour? Those against? That's carried, thank you. There are no matters of urgency that have come to my attention. There are questions on notice from Councillor Charles in relation to Crozier Hill Planned Amendment Report, and I'll take those questions as answered in the information provided. Questions without notice. I believe that there's a question. Oh no, that was a motion without notice. No, are there any questions without notice? Councillor Kemp.
Thank you, Mayor Jenkins. Can the CEO give the chamber an update on the City of Victor Harbor Anchorage car park agreement? Seek leave of the chamber to have the questions and answer recorded in the minutes.
We'll take that on notice. Take it on notice. Take that on notice, Councillor Kemp. Any other questions without notice? Motions on notice? Motions without notice. Councillor Charles.
Yes, I've sent an email to all elected members and to the CEO asking for a request for the next month of June and July for health reasons.
Do we actually need a motion for that, or can elected members take? Yeah, you don't need a motion for that period of time. I think if it's 3 months or more you do, but for that period of time you can take the 2 months without needing to bring it to the chamber. But thank you very much for letting us know, and I do hope that the 2 months allow your health to get better. We now go to item 21.1 confidential items. And so the first recommendation is pursuant to section 92 of the Local Government Act, Council orders that all members of the public except the Chief Executive Officer, Victoria McCurdy, Director of Community and Development, Graham Pathouse, Director Corporate and Customer Services, Karen Rotoczynski, Director Environment and Infrastructure, Kathy Hayter, Group Manager Governance and Finance, Kelly Knight Stacey, and Executive Assistant Karina Overall be excluded from attendance at the meeting for agenda 21.1 confidential potential sale of council-owned land. Council is satisfied that pursuant to section 93B of the Act, the information to be received, discussed or considered in relation to this agenda item is information the disclosure of which could reasonably be expected commercial advantage on a person with whom the council is proposing to conduct business or would prejudice the commercial position of council, and that council may engage in negotiation with the preferred agency to finalise the terms and conditions of the strategic land purchase. The information to be considered in relation to this agenda item includes detailed costings for in-house provision of financial information, the disclosure of which would prejudice the council's commercial position during the negotiations. In addition, the disclosure of this information would, on balance, be contrary to the public interest. The public interest in public access to the meeting has been balanced against the public interest in the continued non-disclosure of this information. The benefit to the public at large resulting from withholding the information outweighs the benefit to it of disclosing the information. The council is satisfied that the principle that the meeting be conducted in a place open to the public has outweighed the circumstances because the disclosure of council's commercial position may be severely prejudiced. Council's ability to be able to renegotiate a cost-effective proposal for the benefit of the council and the community in this matter in relation to the contract negotiations. Would someone like to move that way, please? Thank you, Councillor Charles.
I'm curious whether we really need to go into confidence, because if we're not going to suggest a price or start, trying to make some sort of a suggestion on price, well, I don't see how we compromise anything. It'll be whatever it'll be, according to market value. We're just asking the Chief Executive Officer to facilitate open market expressions.
You can vote against this. The
So
motion
I would
and then
vote
if you want-
against it, yes.
Can I have someone to move this way, please? Thank you, councillor Littley, and seconded by councillor Henderson. Either of you want to speak to it? No? Anybody else want to speak to it? Councillor Kemp?
In consideration, looking at this again, to me, I'm not quite sure what the confidentiality is about this process, that the community knows we own this land. I don't see any problems of us knowing, the community knowing that we're getting an expression of interest to look at whatever the value. I just don't see why it needs to be in confidence, but that's my position.
Through the Mayor, I would anticipate you wouldn't need to retain it in confidence, but there's an element within the report that needs to be shared with you confidentially that I wouldn't want to disclose. So it's to enable the conversation, and as actually an update within the report, which is confidential, but the rest of it, absolutely, you would be releasing it from confidence straight away.
Unless there's any further questions or commentary, I'll put the recommendation to the floor. All those in favour? Those against? That's carried. Thank you.